Good morning, everyone. Well, it's afternoon now, isn't it? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. This is the Medical Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee meeting. We are here to take testimony this afternoon and appreciate all of you being here. Apologize for getting started a little bit later. I know some of you have other obligations, and we appreciate you sticking with us. The first thing I would like to start with is introductions of our ad hoc committee members. If you would start, let's see. Well, Heath isn't here. Fawn, if you would go ahead and start with us, and we'll just introduce ourselves, please.
Fawn Pedalino. I am from District 64, which is Clarendon and Sumter counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Smith, House District 99, Berkeley County. Daniel Allen and Hanahan.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Bobby Cox. I represent District 21 in Greenville County. Good to see Sheriff Lewis will be here with us today.
And I'm Representative Celeste Davis, House District 100, Berkeley County.
Representative Brian Lawson, District 30, Cherokee and Spartanburg counties.
Jordan Pace from Berkeley County.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate that. The next meeting, today is the first of two meetings that we have scheduled. Next meeting is scheduled for, do y'all have the date for me? Tuesday, a week from today. The 30th. We have, how many speakers signed up here today?
14 in person and possibly six online.
14 in person and possibly about 6 online to speak with us this afternoon. Members, you have some letters at your places. And if we get any additional information, we'll pass that out as well. Mr. Sessions, would you introduce yourselves for us, please?
Yes, ma'am. Heath Sessions. I represent House District 46. That's Rock Hill and a little bit of York County.
Thank you. I would like to start the meeting with a brief summary of the bill. This is a Senate bill that came across to us. It's 60 pages long, very what we were calling meaty. There's a lot of details and a lot of information there. So if you would, Mr. Trey Walpole, go ahead and give us a quick summary on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. The South Carolina Compassionate Care Act, S423, would create a medical cannabis program to allow patients with qualifying conditions to register with DHEC to use medical cannabis when prescribed by their physicians and dispensed by a licensed cannabis pharmacy. To qualify, patients must have a qualifying medical condition and a written certification issued by a physician with whom they have a bona fide relationship. Patients must apply to the health department for a registration card. The bill would further create a medical cannabis advisory board to consider petitions to add or delete qualifying conditions. Each department that has a responsibility herein will also require regulatory oversight and will have to promulgate regulations to effectuate the provisions of the bill. As to pharmacists, medical cannabis products would be dispensed by therapeutic cannabis pharmacies overseen by a pharmacist in charge and licensed by both the Board of Pharmacy through LLR and DHEC. A pharmacist must be physically present during dispensing hours. The South Carolina Board of Pharmacy, as aforementioned, will promulgate regulations relating to the dispensing of cannabis, including for health, safety, and security requirements for the pharmacist in charge, and requirements for consultations between a pharmacist and a patient, including when a medical cannabis product has not been previously dispensed to a patient.
Thank you. So what we're going to do here this afternoon is we're going to call up each participant to come and speak with us. We're going to ping pong back and forth between those online and those that are here. We've got signups organized as opposed and unopposed. So if you would, when you come to the podium, if you would say if you're opposed to the bill or in favor of the bill, or if you've not made up your mind or you're indifferent, then let us know that too. So that's the way we're going to do this. We're going to allow you as much time as you feel like you need. We're going to have questions from the ad hoc committee, and we will basically just take the time that we feel like we need on this. However, if it gets out of hand and we start running too late, or we start, getting off topic, I'll say, I'll want the freedom to be able to reel us back in and get us back on task. So, with that, Sheriff Lewis, I believe you're first up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to speak today. As I understand it, it is certified law enforcement and medical representatives speaking today. And I'm very proud to be a part of that as the sitting sheriff here in Greenville County. As your sheriff of Greenville County, I must prioritize the safety and well-being of our community above all else. Today, I speak to you to oppose the legalization of cannabis for medical purposes as it is proposed in this bill. While I align my acknowledgement with the South Carolina Sheriff's Association that proponents of the substance are seeking ways to provide relief to people suffering from debilitating illness, I would argue that conclusive evidence on its effects, whether good or bad, are still very much unknown. I do raise concern, however, when I hear people familiar with marijuana describing their experience with the drug by using terms such as high, stoned, spaced out, or messed up. And yet the very substance that is providing that feeling is up for debate to allow in our community. While touching on these subjective feelings on users, the objective evidence of its harmful effects cannot be ignored. We're witnessing a push to legalize a substance that has the potential to impair an individual's ability to operate vehicles or to even function normally. As mentioned in the South Carolina Sheriff's Association letter to the President of the South Carolina Senate, the National Academy of Science reported substantial evidence of a statistical association between cannabis use and the increased risk of motor vehicle crashes. Another study by the Massachusetts General Hospital and published in the Journal of American Heart Association revealed daily cannabis users face a 25% higher risk of heart attack, 42% higher risk of stroke. These findings underscore the potential dangers of cannabis consumption. Many more studies and research have yet to be conducted regarding the overall effects, and that should bring forth significant alarm to all of us. One might argue that alcohol and tobacco too have detrimental health effects. However, the difference in that debate is that there are no accepted standards regarding cannabis that would facilitate its use in terms of it being effective in a safe manner. In my experience as a law enforcement officer, I have witnessed troubling patterns when it comes to cannabis consumption. Many young people initially experiment with marijuana, seeking a temporary euphoric sensation. However, as tolerance builds, they may escalate to more potent and dangerous substances in pursuit of that same high. We're all too familiar with the devastating consequences of addiction to such drugs. Lastly, I would propose there are legal prescriptions that exist that may be prescribed by doctors and filled by a pharmacy that have undergone scientific research, and as the Sheriff's Association stated in their letter in 2023 to the Senate, these prescriptions are working and are approved. Furthermore, the medications did not require one legislative vote. This is the method and process that should be upheld when talking about medical marijuana. Taking these factors into consideration, I staunchly oppose this bill for medical cannabis. Legalizing cannabis at this point without due diligence would only exacerbate the existing challenges and jeopardize the safety of our citizens. I want to thank you again for your attention, and let us continue to prioritize the well-being of our community above all else. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Lewis. I believe that you have a time constraint, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. We have a former deputy that has passed away and have her funeral shortly here in about 20 minutes.
Okay, I don't want to interfere with that at all. And we all, please send our best wishes to the officer's family. I know how difficult that might be for you. So do you have some time to answer a few questions?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have a question? No, I think he said he's got time for a few questions. If you've got a question, go ahead and ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff, for your testimony here. You mentioned, would you support some sort of testing from the medical community in regards to this drug to sort of hash out its medical benefits in a controlled setting?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Was the last thing you said a control setting? Was that the end?
Yes, sir, in a medical controlled setting.
I think it's certainly up to the medical community. Like we said, what is the benefit of the true benefit of medical marijuana? Why, with Murinol and some of those things already approved, why is those things not going through the FDA, being approved, given out a prescription by a doctor, and then given out dispensed to a pharmacy, like I go to Walgreens to get my diabetic medicine, those kind of things. I don't buy them from a specific dispensary. And I think that's what adds to the problem when you talk about dispensing medical marijuana. The effects of medical marijuana, smokable, chewables, gummies, we had multiple discussions when it comes to those things. And our major concern is keeping it away from the public, those who really don't need it. We have enough issues today with Delta 8, even Delta 9, that people are using, obviously for non-medical purposes in a lot of ways. And we see the effects on our young people. We see the effects on motorists on the roadway. We see the effects on homes. So I don't, again, if the byproducts, I'm no doctor, but if the byproducts are what is the drug that can render some type of medication for people, again, why is it not prescribed by a doctor and then issued by a pharmacy or dispensed by a pharmacy, just like any other medication, if that's what we're going to call it?
Thank you, Sheriff Lewis. We appreciate you being here with us this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much for what you do.
Thank you.
Dr. Nagakati.
Next up, we have Dr. Nagakati. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, from USC. Glad to have you with us.
I want to thank the committee for giving me an opportunity to provide this testimony. My name is Dr. Nagarkari. I'm currently the Carolina Distinguished Professor at University of South Carolina. I also served as Vice President for Research for over 10 years at USC. My lab has been doing research on cannabinoids for over 25 years. Our lab was the first one to demonstrate that cannabinoids can be used effectively to treat inflammation as well as autoimmune diseases, as well as certain types of cancers. So basically, autoimmune diseases, there are over 80 different types of diseases, such as arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, myasthenia gravis, type 1 diabetes, against which there is no cure. And so right now what patients are taking are immunosuppressive drugs. And you must have seen the ads in the TVs when they say when you take those drugs, you should be careful because you become susceptible to infections as well as cancer. So our lab demonstrated for the first time that cannabinoids, particularly CBD and THC found in marijuana plant, is highly effective in suppressing inflammation, but at the same time, it does not cause you more susceptible to infections as well as cancer. We're also able to show that there are certain types of cancers which express cannabinoid receptors. So therefore, when cannabinoids act on them, the cells commit suicide, and so the cancers are killed, cancer cells are killed. So there is clear evidence to show that certain types of cancers might benefit from these cannabinoids. And I just heard the sheriff talking about, these are foreign chemicals. We don't know what impact it's going to have on your own system, on your health, and so on. But I want to stress, and not many people know about this, is that we produce our own cannabinoids, which are called as endocannabinoids. We produce them in small quantities because of which we are not high all the time. But when you jog, when you do exercise, you produce more endocannabinoids. That's why you feel very good. That's called as runner's high, for example. And what these cannabinoids and the cannabinoid receptors do in our system is that they regulate appetite, they regulate sleep, they regulate body temperature, they regulate immune functions, and they regulate reproductive functions. So they are there to help us lead a normal life. So when we do not produce enough endocannabinoids, then we become susceptible to diseases. So there is clear evidence now to show that there are certain clinical disorders that are associated with decreased production of your endocannabinoids. So therefore, when these patients take the marijuana cannabinoids, it's as if they're replenishing the cannabinoids that you don't produce, your body does not produce. So it's somewhat similar to if you are deficient in particular vitamin, you are taking an extra vitamin pill to reconstitute that particular deficiency. So that's what is happening with respect to these cannabinoids. So therefore, the cannabinoids that are found in the marijuana plant are identical to the endocannabinoids that we produce. So therefore, we should not treat them as some foreign chemicals that is going to cause significant damage. Secondly, we have reported that cannabidiol can be used in the treatment of autoimmune hepatitis. And that patent filed at University of South Carolina has been approved by the FDA as an orphan drug to treat autoimmune hepatitis. We've also shown that these cannabinoids are highly effective against hepatitis, against multiple sclerosis in animal models. And more importantly, I'm sure you're aware of the fact that when COVID hit and COVID pandemic hit, the not only United States but the entire world, almost 10% of the patients were likely to get severe infection, and they would be admitted to the hospitals. And once you get admitted to the hospitals, not many people recover from that. And the reason for that is, again, your immune system goes haywire and starts producing what are called as cytokines or chemokines, and that leads to multi-organ failure, and then the patient dies. So that disease is called as acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. ARDS can also be triggered by certain bacteria, certain viruses, certain chemical agents. And once you have ARDS and you're admitted to the hospital, almost 40% of the patients die. Currently there's no treatment against ARDS. We have shown in animal models that when you use cannabinoids, if you use the toxins, it kills 100% of the animals. But if you use cannabinoids, you find that 100% of those animals survive. So we were the ones to clearly, write a review article suggesting that therefore cannabinoids might be a way to treat severe cases of COVID-19, those who are admitted to the hospital and where their immune response goes haywire and starts producing these cytokines or chemokines. And in fact, epidemiological studies have shown that people who use marijuana regularly have less severe disease from COVID-19, as well as they can recover much faster, which clearly shows that cannabinoids are highly effective in suppressing hyperinflammation, thereby preventing multi-organ failure and disease. So right now, there are no treatments, appropriate treatments available for a large number of these debilitating diseases, what I call as autoimmune diseases like arthritis, for example. And patients are taking right now opioids, and you know what happens when people start taking opioids. And also, I heard about Sheriff talking about, people will start using this, and there are going to be, accidents and other instances where there could be significant damage. But what we want to stress here is that in South Carolina, we are not proposing to approve recreational use of marijuana that's going to be available for everybody. What we are saying is for those patients, select patients who have certain clinical disorders against which there is no other treatment, we are saying that those patients be allowed by the doctors to have access to the medical cannabis. And lastly, I would say that there are children who suffer from epilepsy who get hundreds and hundreds of seizures a day, right? And for some of these kids born with a genetic defect, there is no other treatment available. And when they tried cannabinoids, that particularly THC and CBD, they found immediate relief and their seizures completely stopped. So that was used by a pharmaceutical company to come up with what is called as Epidiolex, which consists of CBD, which is now approved by FDA. But nonetheless, the cost of that medicine is almost over $30,000 a year, which patients cannot have, can't afford that type of money. And secondly, they found that the CBD is not sometimes effective against certain types of seizures. So therefore, the parents have to resort to THC. And they cannot give THC in states like South Carolina because it's still illegal. So therefore, they are forced to move out of South Carolina to other states where they have access to THC so that they can control the seizures seen in these children by having access to THC. So I'll stop there, and one last thing I want to say is that people who are healthy do not have a right to tell people who are sick and say that, no, you cannot have this plant which has the medicinal value, because if you start using this, we who are healthy will also start abusing it. So I don't think the society should be made in such a way that we decline any type of medicine that provides relief for patients who have no other source of medicines available to treat their pain as well as their debilitating conditions.
Thank
I want
you.
to thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir. Mr. Pace.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Doctor, for coming to speak with us. So you mentioned that there are 2 of the 3 cannabis-derived drugs that the FDA has approved, and the
Yes.
cost associated with at least one of them is $32,000 a year.
Yes.
Are any of those covered by private insurance or like Medicare, federal government?
To the best of my knowledge, if the children have certain types of epilepsy against which the FDA has approved Epidiolex, which consists of CBD isolated from the marijuana or the hemp cannabis plant, then the insurance covers that. But if those children do not respond to CBD, but they respond really well, in fact, I know quite a few parents who have told me that CBD doesn't seem to work as well as THC or a combination of CBD and THC, then they do not have any access to that because it's illegal right now.
So the ones that are approved by the FDA don't have the THC component, it's
It
just the
doesn't have
CBD?
the THC, it has only CBD.
Understood. Thank you.
I do have a couple of
Yes.
questions. You talked a lot about
Endocannabinoids.
cannabinoids. And some of the examples that you used made me think about endorphins.
Yes.
So what is the difference between endorphins and cannabinoids that are
That's a great,
internal?
that's a great question. So people previously thought that, when you do exercise or when you jog, it's the endorphins, and the production of endorphins goes up, and that's what makes you feel high or, feel euphoric. But more recent has shown that it's not because of endorphins, but it's because of the endocannabinoids. So these endocannabinoids are compounds that are produced in the brain, as well as by the cells of the immune system, as well as so many other different organs. And so when those endocannabinoids are released, they bind to what are called as CB1 receptors that are expressed in the brain, and that leads to euphoric type of feeling. So because of which, you feel really nice about, but the thing is that in our system, we produce very small amounts which are highly controlled by enzymes. So as soon as a significant level of endocannabinoids increases, they're broken down by enzymes. So because of which we are not, as I said, we are not high all the time, but whereas marijuana cannabinoids stay in your system for a longer time, as well as you ingest them in higher doses, because of which, it creates the recreational marijuana high.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. And just for the record, yesterday I went running. Half of the time I felt great.
Yeah.
Half of the time something happened in there. Something was cut off. So
Yeah, so half the time you produced endocannabinoids, and the other half of the time when you got pain, you needed
right.
cannabis cannabinoids.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you. I do have one more question for you. Are
Yes.
your studies published?
Yes, so I have published over 350 papers, out of which almost one half of those or so are on cannabinoids. And our review article that which we wrote in year 2000, use of cannabinoids in the treatment of inflammation and autoimmune diseases, has been cited more than 700 times all over the world. So yes.
So are they published on the internet somewhere? Can we get access to them?
Yes. So if you do PubMed and you put my name Nagarkari, P, and cannabinoids or cannabis, it'll give you all those papers. And because our research is funded by NIH, you have free access to the entire articles.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Mr. Pace, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when was this endocannabinoid system discovered? Is that a recent thing?
It was discovered in late 1990s. Yes. So the first discovery was CBD, which was isolated from marijuana plant. Then they discovered THC, and then the cannabinoid people started wondering, like, what is the receptor through which it acts? So they were able to clone and isolate CB1, CB2 receptors. Then they started saying, like, why would plant produce something that activates our receptors? So are we producing something on our own which activates these receptors? That led to the discovery of endocannabinoids. So it's kind of in late 1990s.
So after the Schedule 1 and all that stuff was.
After this, yeah, Schedule 1 was done in 1970s, I think, during Nixon era, I think.
And that reminded me of, would it be a fair kind of comparison to say how Parkinson's is a deficiency of dopamine?
Yes.
That some of these diseases are a deficiency in these endocannabinoids?
Yes, so in fact, there are now, more recently, they've discovered that there are children who are born, or people who are born with a defect in production of endocannabinoids or endocannabinoid receptors like CB1, CB2, and they have a wide array of diseases. That shows clearly for the very first time that there is genetics involved, that genetic defect in production of endocannabinoids or the receptors can lead to a wide array of clinical disorders. So that's also been published right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We
Thank
appreciate you
I
being
appreciate
here.
it.
Next up, we have Dr. Stephen Cutler.
Madam
Good
Chair.
afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's a tremendous pleasure to be with you today. My name is Stephen Cutler. I have a PhD in medicinal chemistry. That is the discipline in which somebody designs and makes and carries through clinical trials new medications. So if you're on prescription products or on over-the-counter products, someone like me designed and made that particular product. I have expertise in natural products as well, and I have worldwide expertise in marijuana. That comes from having worked at the University of Mississippi. At University of Mississippi, they have the only federal license in the country to grow marijuana. Everyone else growing marijuana in the United States is violating Schedule I of the Controlled Substance Act. I worked on the plant for the 10 years I was there and have continued to work on it when I was recruited and came to the University of South Carolina as the Dean of the College of Pharmacy. The National Institutes of Health has funded me with approximately $25 million to study the plant. So what does that include? It includes isolating over 500 compounds from cannabis. 500 compounds. So an example would be you drink coffee in the morning, caffeine is one of the stimulants that's in it. I isolated 500 from the plant. I characterized the chemical structure of those, and I tested them in assays that I created myself. Those assays included taking Chinese hamster ovary cells, which are commercially available, or human embryonic kidney cells, which are also commercially available, and then taking the human genetic information for the cannabinoid receptors 1 and 2. There are more than 2, but 1 and 2 are what are available commercially. And transfecting the CHO cells, those Chinese hamster ovary cells, and the HEX cells, the human embryonic kidney cells, with the genetic information to overexpress or overproduce the cannabinoid receptors, so CB1, CB2. So I tested all of those compounds that I isolated from marijuana, determined what the pharmacological effects were of those compounds, and then I translated that into rodent models, tested those in rodent models for what their pharmacological effects would be. I was primarily interested in looking for those compounds that didn't have a psychotropic effect, didn't cause a high, as the sheriff identified earlier, but also had other potential utility in the management of diseases. And I can tell you, there's a vast array of compounds that have great potential for therapeutic use that comes from the plant. And we will see those eventually introduced onto the market. So I want to give a story of one compound in particular, CBD. GW Pharma is a company out of the UK, contracted with the University of Mississippi to grow FDA, good manufactured practice, GMP, cannabidiol. So how does one do that from a plant? That's not something that's traditionally done or overseen by the FDA. So we produced CBD from plant material, had it one plant that produced, we used it to take cuttings from and produced a 12-acre field of genetically identical plant material, isolated CBD from it, purified it, and provided it to the physicians doing clinical trials out in Colorado. Not because of Colorado law, but because that's where those two physicians were located. They were looking primarily at pharmacoresistant forms of epilepsy in children. I'll give you a story of how this came to be. A little girl named Charlotte Figge was an identical twin, but she was the one that suffered hundreds of seizures a day. Her mother heard about cannabidiol, CBD, and its potential utility in the treatment of pharmacoresistant forms of epilepsy. That means there's no drug available in the world to treat that epilepsy. She had it cleaned up by a chemist, someone much like me, gave it to her daughter, and in the first day, her daughter only experienced 2 seizures. She goes from hundreds of seizures a day, that was her quality of life, to 2 seizures, and those seizures happened at night. She did pass away eventually, but that led to GW Pharma's interest in pursuing this particular compound to manage pharmacoresistant forms of epilepsy. In the clinical trials, we were watching those very closely. The efficacy of the compound was around 38 to 40% in the 2 different forms of epilepsy. I was convinced the FDA would not approve it because they want to see 95% effectiveness. Well, I failed to estimate, and I underestimated the parents. Imagine if you had a child. Imagine if you had a child suffering 200-300 seizures a day, and you found that there was a product that would treat your child. Oh, you're going to go talk to the FDA, even though the percent of effectiveness is not what the FDA is looking for. They were successful. It's the first time in the history of the United States, after the Controlled Substance Act was passed in 1972, that a Schedule I product was now therapeutically available. The next hurdle was the DEA, and the same parents went after the DEA. They rattled around with the Controlled Substance Act. They changed it from a Schedule I to a Schedule III, to then eventually, very quickly, it's not even scheduled anymore. Now, that's not the same product that you see being sold in gas stations. This has been refined, it's been cleaned up, and it meets FDA requirements, FDA criteria. So we led that by providing those clinicians in Colorado purified materials so they could conduct FDA-approved clinical trials of CBD. I will echo the comments of the previous Dr. Nagakardi. The endocannabinoid system is a newly founded system. It's not been known for very long. In fact, we knew about Delta-9 THC before we knew about the endocannabinoid system. And what that system is comprised of those receptors, CB1, CB2, and it also includes the substrate, anandamide, which is produced right now in all of us. And the anandamide is acting on those receptors and is causing various physiological events. It's influencing how we live. It's influencing your immune system. And so what we were able to do when we look at marijuana and we look at the compounds that are produced by marijuana is we gain a better understanding of the endocannabinoid system. And we can now begin to target it for other drug therapies. We will see in our lifetimes new drugs come from cannabis that are going to be used to manage pain, also better drugs probably to manage epilepsy. I can drill into that if you need me to. And we're going to see products that will also be used in the spasticity of multiple sclerosis. And there are other potential utilities. I know it sounds far-fetched that a single plant can produce so many different pharmacological effects, but these compounds are very diverse. They're not all very similar. I'm not here to support the bill. I'm not here to oppose the bill. I'm here to provide expert testimony as one of the individuals in the world who understands this plant very well. And I look forward to providing more today as well as going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Cutler. Do we have any questions? Do we have questions? Oh, Mr. Pace.
I can't be the only one to ask questions. Y'all got to step up. I do have a question. You mentioned the HEK cells. Was that HEK 293?
It is.
Okay.
Oh, you know a little something about this.
I was just curious. So
yes.
Which drug was developed using that?
Those cells I used to create a supercell that will produce high levels of the receptors, CB1 and CB2. CBD doesn't actually act on CB1 or CB2. Mechanistically, we're not exactly clear why it has the anti-epileptic effects that we see.
Okay, thank you.
But I will add this. I don't want to give too much proprietary information away because I do want to pursue patents on my studies. But I will tell you that Epidiolex, CBD, is not as good as what we could have if we had available some of the other psychotropic THC derivatives.
Okay.
And I don't mean a high level that causes a person to be high, no pun intended. I'm suggesting a smaller amount of one of those THC derivatives that will have a better anti-epileptic effect. So that 38% of the population in the clinical trial, we could get it up to higher into the 40s, low 50s.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Cutler, are the results of your studies publicly available?
Some of it. So the best stuff I've retained because I want to pursue it for intellectual reasons. Yes.
Okay.
I will add one other thing to this too, and this one is available. Publication surrounds a compound that was being sold in Europe as a diet medication. You can reverse the effects that people talk about in terms of the munchies. This particular compound acts on cannabinoid receptors. The problem is it acts too good. And in doing so, it led to depression and suicide with some of the patients. I offer this because that gave us insight into the fact that the endocannabinoid system regulates depression, among other things. And so if we use these products according to what we understand that the scientific literature shows us, we can also manage depression.
Thank you. One more question. I believe that in law today, South Carolina law today, there's a reference to, and you're going to have to make sure I'm correct on this, hydrocannabinoid or oil, something like that, that's used specifically for seizures. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that one, but I do know cannabidiol, CBD, is the generic name for Epidiolex, which is sold in the U.S. being prescribed today in Columbia, South Carolina, and other parts of the United States.
Okay, so that's something that's currently available
It is
here in the state of South Carolina, legally available.
legally available.
Okay.
And it's available mostly for children. All right, so this gets back to the earlier question about reimbursement and insurance coverage. In children, yes. There are adults who have been derived benefit from Epidiolex, but because it's not indicated in adults, then it makes it hard for one to receive claims through your insurance.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very
Cutler. We
much.
appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Chief Keel. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I don't think anybody, I think everybody knows my position on medical marijuana. It hasn't changed. I guess context for the opinion I have about it is, again, my 45 plus years in law enforcement, what I've seen, my first 10 years at SLED, for about 7 of those 10 years I spent working narcotics, primarily undercover narcotics. I was in many homes and saw the devastation in these homes of what marijuana does to parents and the impact that it has on children that are living in homes with parents who are routinely using marijuana. And also, again, from the standpoint of what I've seen in my career in dealing with drugs in general since then. So my position on the legalization of marijuana, again, is unchanged. Proponents of this bill have continually stated that this is the most conservative bill in the country, and I would have to disagree with that. While this bill currently before you does not allow the burning of plant material, it does allow vaping and edibles, drinks, ointments, lotion, patches, etc., all without a dosing schedule or limit on THC concentration. In many cases, a vape cartridges, oils, edible products contain incredibly high percentages of THC mixed with unreasonably small serving sizes that are often overlooked. And I think we all know today, we read in the media, and I will mention some articles here before I finish, about the epidemic among our young people in vaping today. And it is a problem in our schools and in our with our young people that we see the vaping that they are engaged in. This is extremely dangerous, especially for our children and our most vulnerable. Simply put, this is a blank check to receive a large amount of high-potency THC products every 14 days. As you can see in attached, I hope you have my attachment 1 with my, as you can see in that attachment, it was prepared by our scientists at SLED Forensic Laboratory. A qualifying patient can obtain a certification to receive 2,050 doses of THC oil at 80% potency every 14 days. Or qualifying patient could choose to receive 8,200 doses of THC oil at 20% potency every 14 days if they selected lower potency. When was the last time that we needed South Carolina legislation for medicine to be prescribed by a doctor or dispensed by a pharmacy? When medicine goes through the normal FDA process, a state law is not necessary. But that's not what we're dealing with when we're discussing marijuana. Doctors cannot legally prescribe it, and pharmacists cannot legally dispense it at our local pharmacy. There's no way to dose it accurately, and rather than this large medical marijuana bill that we have in is attempt to legislate around the FDA approval process by creating a complex scheme to cultivate, process, dispense marijuana that still violates federal law. The FDA, I hear the two doctors up here, and I want to tell you that I am in 100% supportive of what they are doing from the standpoint of studying this plant. The FDA was created in 1938, and even before that, I think all the way back to 1906, there was some effort by American Medical Association to start testing medications before they were marketed. And the FDA supports sound, scientifically based research in the medicinal uses of drug products containing cannabis and cannabis-derived compounds, and will continue to work with companies interested in bringing safe, effective, and quality products to the market. You've heard, again, the two doctors both talk about they're funded by NIH, and these programs are in place to try and determine what is safe for our citizens. Caregivers and patients cannot be confident that the FDA-approved drugs have been carefully evaluated for safety, efficacy, and quality, and are monitored by FDA once they're on the market. However, the use of unapproved cannabis, like what we're talking about, cannabis-derived products, can have unpredictable and unintended consequences, including serious safety risks. Also, there's been no FDA review of data from rigorous clinical trials to support that these unapproved products are safe for the various therapeutic uses for which they're being used. This bill would ultimately allow people to vape, eat, or ingest marijuana that have not had any traditional medical review and is not approved by the Food and Drug Administration. This is truly a dangerous proposition. Perhaps that's why 77% of South Carolinians said that marijuana should be regulated by the FDA in the Winthrop poll in 2016. It is not surprising that many proponents of this bill like to use the word prescribe, discussing marijuana. They do this to make us think that it's handled like any other prescription medication, but that narrative is simply false. The marijuana allowed in this bill remains a Schedule I drug. This means that under federal law, it cannot be legally prescribed by a doctor, and it cannot be legally dispensed at a local pharmacy. And it cannot be legally possessed without individuals violating federal law. In South Carolina and throughout the country, marijuana is the number one reason for addiction and treatment admissions for minors ages 12 to 17, according to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. According to South Carolina Department of Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Services, 73% of adolescents who are seen at associated addiction facilities were seen for marijuana addiction. Again, I spent the last 45 years of my life standing up for those who can't stand for themselves, and this is why I've consistently voiced my concerns about legalizing marijuana in any form. On March 18, 2022, the Harvard Gazette published an article titled "Medical Marijuana May Trigger Substance Abuse," with a headline that reads, "The hype over medical marijuana for treating health problems may be exaggerated, researchers find." The study that was referenced is titled "Effect of Medical Marijuana Card Ownership on Pain, Insomnia, and Affective Disorder Symptoms in Adults." And this was a randomized clinical trial, and the results were published in the Journal of American Medical Association Network Open. The study found in the randomized clinical trial involving 186 participants that immediate acquisition of medical marijuana card increased the incidence and severity of cannabis use disorder and resulted in no significant improvement in pain, anxiety, or depressive symptoms, but did improve self-reported sleep quality. There have been many claims about the benefits of medical marijuana for treating pain, insomnia, anxiety, depression, without sound scientific evidence to support them, says the lead author, Dr. Jody Gilman, associate professor at Harvard Medical School Department of Psychiatry, and the director of neuroimaging at the Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Addiction Medicine. In this first study of patients randomized to obtain medical marijuana cards, we learned that there can be negative consequences to using cannabis for medical purposes. People with pain, anxiety, and depression symptoms fail to report any improvements. Though those with insomnia experienced improved sleep. Particularly disturbing to Gilman was the fact that individuals with symptoms of anxiety and depression, the most common condition for which medical cannabis is sought, were most vulnerable to developing cannabis use disorder. Cannabis use disorder symptoms include the need for more cannabis to overcome drug tolerance and continued use despite physical or psychological problems caused by cannabis. In other words, it's the inability to stop using it, even though you know it's affecting your health and social life that you live in. On January the 25th, 2022, WLTX reporter Becky Buds, and that's article attachment 4, published an article titled Medical Marijuana Bill Up for Debate in South Carolina Senate on Wednesday. In the article, Executive Director of Veterans Alliance for Holistic Alternatives, Gary Hess, said, "The truth is, if it doesn't pass at 22 veterans a day, we're going to lose 9,000 veterans." If that statement were true, it would be incredibly impactful on the current debate about the benefits of marijuana. Unfortunately, it is simply false. According to statements made in the debate about the benefits of marijuana, again, it is just false. The data from the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, Veteran Suicide Data and Reporting, South Carolina's veteran suicide rate in 2021 was 31.3 per 100,000, lower than the southeastern rate of 34.4. Colorado was 56.1 per 100,000. Nevada was 50.7, and Oregon was 49.6 per 100,000. The veteran suicide rates for those three states for veterans 18 to 34 is especially troubling. Those three states, all of which are similar in size and population to South Carolina, arguably have more access to marijuana, including veterans, than any other state. As noted in the table below, the veteran suicide rate rose in each of the listed states from 2014 to 2021 as more marijuana became legally available. It's a time that we've seen significant expansion of medical and recreational marijuana across the country. It is factual data like that that is sorely needed to tackle the difficult issues and to provide treatment to veterans with respect and dignity that they deserve. Losing just one veteran is tragic, and that is why continued research is vitally necessary to solve this national crisis. I've spent my career pursuing justice for victims in South Carolina, and I'm compassionate about those that are suffering from debilitating diseases and illnesses. And that is why I support continued clinical trials, the research like the doctors are talking about here today, forms of medicine that's legally obtained, FDA approved, prescribed by a physician, and dispensed by a pharmacy. That is what medicine is in the 21st century. This bill does not follow that tradition of the medical model, which is why, in my opinion, it is not about medicine. This bill is about legalizing marijuana in South Carolina. I want to call attention to some articles that, and again, you have some of those, and just make some comments. When this fight started for the legalization of medical marijuana some years ago, I was one of the first ones to speak out in opposition to it then. And I said to myself at that point that just what I've said today, that I'm not debating that that plant may provide some benefit to some folks, but it needs to be studied. We need to know what precautions need to be taken. We need to know the ins and outs, the positives and the negatives of it, and the effects it can have on people. And I said, the longer this thing goes on, the more facts will come out. And as I read continuously articles about it, that's just what's happened, because there is more research being done today than's ever been done before. But also there's more research being done on high potency marijuana, which was not the case in the past, and what we see today. Some of the articles that's come out recently: cost of cannabis, vaping THC dramatically increases psychosis. California legalized weed 5 years ago. Why is the illicit market still thriving? One of my biggest concerns is with this bill, it allows 15 cultivation centers and 30 processing facilities. Once we go down that road, we're not going to be able to claw it back. In California today, they have more outlets selling marijuana products illegally than they do legally. And they're not the only ones. New York's the same way. Connecticut officials warn of fentanyl-laced marijuana after overdoses. Driving both high and drunk, more dangerous than either alone. The New England Journal of Medicine legalized marijuana in Canada in 2018. More drivers injured in crashes are testing positive for drugs, 18%, than 9% previously. Many marijuana vendors aim advertising at kids, and stronger marijuana linked to more psychosis in teens. It was on NBC News. They had a 3-minute program here recently that I recorded. I wish I had it to show you today. Again, I think this was a young man who was the son of a neuroscientist that started smoking marijuana when he was young. His mother knew it. She admitted she knew he was, but she said she had no idea of the potency of THC in marijuana today. He ended up with psychosis. He ended up going to harder drugs, which we've always said that marijuana was a pathway or gateway drug, and he ended up dying of overdose. In attachment 2 there, medical marijuana may trigger substance abuse. Again, it's part of backs up to that Harvard study that I was talking about. Effect of medical marijuana on card ownership on pain, insomnia. Again, it's the study that I talked about under attachment 3. Attachment 4 is the article that was done on the veterans. Attachment 5 is something else that our lab put together, and I happen to have behind me 2 of our forensic scientists, our lab director, Dr. Todd Huey and Wendy Bell, who both are toxicologists by trade. And this bill would allow many of the things that we're seeing today when we talk about Delta 9, Delta 8 products that we're seeing sold in gas stations and convenience stores. We just see 66,000 of these products in one location, and every single one tested positive for marijuana. But they're being sold to our young people, and there's no regulation on them at all. And we have no idea what they're doing to our young people and the danger that they're causing. Attachment number 6 talks about understanding potential relationship between mental health and cannabis use. In this study, they found over 14,500 people with cannabis-induced disorder diagnosis during the study period, resulting in nearly 19,000 emergency room visits. The 2019 rate of cannabis-induced disorder emergency department visits per 10,000 increased 46.2%. Between 2019 and 2020, we found nearly a 50% increase in the rate of both cannabis-induced disorder emergency department visits and cannabis-involved emergency department visits. The substantial and sustained rise in the rate of cannabis-induced disorder visits between 2019 and 2023 suggests a growing impact on individuals' health, raising questions about potential short and long-term consequences of increased cannabis use. The CDC studied cannabis-involved emergency department visits and found an increase among kids under 10 between the ages of 11 and 14. The rates in this study are similar, slightly lower, but likely due to the difference in the populations that were studied. Attachment number 7, marijuana and youth, the impact of marijuana use on teen health and well-being. In 2022, 30.7% of 12th graders reported using marijuana in the past year, and 6.3% reported using marijuana daily for the last 30 days. Compared to teens who do not use marijuana, teens who use marijuana may be less likely to graduate from high school or college. Research shows that marijuana use during teen years can harm the brain. Attachment number 8, more teens use marijuana or suffering from psychosis. This isn't the cannabis of 20, 30 years ago, it says. Even one psychotic episode following cannabis use was associated with a 47% increase, a 47% chance of a person developing schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in a 2017 study by the American Journal of Psychiatry. The risk was highest for people 16 to 25 years old and higher than substances including amphetamines, hallucinogens, opioids, and alcohol. About 1/3 of the children using cannabis report experiencing hallucinations or paranoia. The average THC content of cannabis seized by Drug Enforcement Administration was 15% in 2021, up from 4% in 1995, and many products advertise THC concentrations up to 90% today. Attachment number 9, state attorneys general urged Congress to address risks posed by intoxicating hemp products. The bipartisan group of 20 attorney generals are imploring Congress to take action to address a looming public health crisis due to burgeoning multi-million-dollar market for intoxicating hemp products. But the market has become increasingly dominated by intoxicating products that are largely unregulated and often sold in gas stations and convenience stores. The reality is that this law has unleashed on our states a flood of products that are nothing less than a more potent form of cannabis, often in candy form and made attractive for youth and children, with staggering levels of potency. No regulation, no oversight, a limited capability for our officers to rein them in. Number 10, again, the reality of legal weed in California: huge illegal grows, violence, worker exploitation, and death. And I know you say, well, Chief, California has recreational marijuana, and why do you even bring that up? If you think that we're just going to have 15 cultivation centers in South Carolina if this law passes, you're going to be sorely mistaken, because it's going to embolden people to grow it, and it's going to embolden people to try to get it into the market, and it's going to get into the market. Just like my counterparts from other states tell me that 80% of the marijuana being sold in their state is in the black market. It's not legally produced. It's not legally cultivated or processed. The last thing I want to mention is this. I heard the folks out in Arizona that came here and testified a few years ago. I can't remember whether it was a House or Senate committee, and they talked about the card holders in Arizona, and I thought it was interesting what they said, and that was years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, but those numbers have not changed, and I think it's important to see. We all talk about, when we talk about this, we talk about providing these products for people that have epilepsy and cancer and serious illnesses that they're not finding other help for. That's what we talk about. But the evidence suggests that's just not the case. And I'm going to use 2 different months because they publish a monthly report. Arizona Department of Health Services to publish a monthly report. May 2022 monthly report. 88,669 out of 191,682 cardholders are in the healthiest demographic of their society, 18 to 40 years old. 88,000. So about half of the number that have cardholders are in the healthiest demographic of their society. And you know what? 180,000 of those card holders have a card for chronic pain. That's what their pain is, chronic pain. That's what they're getting a card for. Only 2.24% for cancer. 1.64% for nausea. Seizures, 0.73%. I think that says a lot. I don't know about y'all, but when I was 18 to 40, I didn't have no pains. At 66, I got a lot of pains. I wake up every morning with pain, but I don't need marijuana to take care of my pain. In May 2023, similar numbers. Again, about 50%, the highest number of card holders, 18 to 40 years old. And again, 94.7%, 119,748. Pain was their choice for having a marijuana card. Again, I think that says a lot about why we do this. I just want to say in closing this, we live in a state right now that seems to be really on the move in a lot of areas. We have our problems like every other state in the country. I served 5.5 years as president of a national association called ASIA, which is the Association of State Criminal Investigative Agencies. That is all the state bureaus of investigation of 49 of the 50 states that have a state bureau investigation. Hawaii does not yet. They're working on it, but they're not there yet. Every counterpart, every time we have a meeting, we'll meet again in the next couple of weeks, we have a round table. And we go around and we talk at that round table about problems, successes, budgets, whatnot, about what's going on in our states. And there's not a single counterpart in any of these states that speak up and say, hey, medical marijuana and recreational marijuana is the greatest thing ever happened to our state. They all talk about how damaging it has been to their state, and they all talk about how it is absolutely out of control. They can't control it. And their general assemblies have not given them the powers to control it, the resources to control it. What they're doing now in one state, Washington State, they gave them some additional agents to go after the ones that are growing marijuana illegally because it's not getting taxed. We have people moving to South Carolina every day, and I think they're moving here for a good reason. We have new industry coming to South Carolina every day, and we have new and good high-paying jobs. I've heard the governor talk about how many job openings we have right now that are unfilled. I just want everybody to know, if you think that passing this bill is going to be just for those that have illnesses, again, I just ask you to look in Arizona. what the largest percentage of cardholders, 18 to 40 years old, get a marijuana card for chronic pain. It's going to be no different here. And if you think it's going to help our employment issue, it's going to help our productivity issue for our new industry and businesses coming to South Carolina, I think you'll be sorely mistaken. I urge you to oppose this bill. We don't have to do what every other state has done. We don't have to make the mistakes that they've made. We are learning from their mistakes right now. And let the doctors, the ones that should be doing the research and the clinical trials and working with the FDA and the National Institute of Health, let them tell us what drugs and what medicine is good for our citizens. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that so very much. Who has questions? I have a question for you. Let's talk about guns for a minute.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's say now that, today, I decide to walk into a gun store and buy a gun. There's a certain amount of paperwork that has to be filled out with that, correct?
That's correct.
What exactly do I have to fill out? And I'm getting to a point here.
Well, there's a form you have to fill out, and I think it has about 11 questions on it, and it asks you a number of different questions, whether you're a felon, whether you've been convicted of a crime, questions such as that, whether you're a U.S. citizen.
And it asks also whether you use illicit drugs or not, correct?
That's correct, it does.
So does it also not only have that language on there, but I believe it's got language that speaks specifically of marijuana?
I don't know if it has language that speaks specifically to marijuana, but I can tell you that the ATF has put out a guidance that says if you are a marijuana card holder, that you are prohibited from purchasing a firearm.
So I just want to make sure I understand that. If I have a marijuana card that prohibits me from buying a gun, is that correct?
You would be prohibited under federal statute.
Under federal statute.
From purchasing a firearm.
Because federally, it's an illegal substance.
That's correct.
And so,
again, any drug user would be prohibited, any known drug user is prohibited under the current law from possessing or purchasing a firearm for 1 year right now. I mean, if we go and arrest somebody tomorrow and they have drugs on them and our lab determines that those drugs are what we believe they to be, then we put them into NICS system and the National Instant Background Check system, and basically they are prohibited from 1 year for purchasing or possession of firearm or ammunition.
so what happens if the FDA reclassifies reclassifies marijuana as a, and I'm not quite sure exactly what the classifications are, but there's a classification of drugs, I believe, that the FDA recognizes have medicinal value.
It's a Schedule I drug now, which again, the FDA, or the way it's classified, DEA, would say that it has no legitimate medical use.
So if the FDA, through their studies, and not only the FDA studies, or from studies that have come from our universities, if the FDA decides to reclassify that drug to recognize that it may have medicinal use, then what does that change about our conversation?
I think it would change our, because again, if it classified it to be a Schedule III drug, which that's some of the talk, that again, it would be a drug that you could get through a prescription. It would be like any other medication that you could get through a prescription.
So it would be treated by the FDA like any other pharmaceutical?
Well, it would be treated for purchasing a firearm. It would be treated by the ATF, I assume, like any other drug purchasing. Again, if somebody's using even if somebody's an abuser of opioids, it may be prescription. If they answer the question truthfully on the application, they would be prohibited.
Right. Okay,
if they're abuser of a particular drug, and that could be a prescription drug as well.
okay. Do we have any questions? Representative Smith?
Chief, thank you for your heartfelt testimony and your unwavering, longtime service to our state. It certainly is recognized and appreciated by all of us. On that last conversation, you were talking about the reclassification of Schedule 1 to 3 by, if that were to happen at the DEA. Would it be in South Carolina and every state's advantage to be having these conversations to get ahead of that? Tell us what that could look like in our state if that reclassification does happen from a law enforcement perspective.
From a law enforcement perspective, I'm not exactly sure what would happen, to be quite frank. Obviously, it would change the way we do things today, but it would still be much up to the General Assembly about the way some of it was treated.
And if I read that correctly, the HHS on the federal level has made the recommendation. Is that your understanding as well at the end of the year?
I know somebody has, but I'm not sure. Again, I'm sure one of the doctors maybe would know, or maybe even my forensic scientist would know, but I'm not sure. I know that there has been a recommendation by some department to do that.
I want to be very clear. I'm not in favor or in support of legalizing marijuana usage throughout the state. However, it is very, very concerning to me as now an elected official. We've had conversations in my 4 years that I've been here, and I thank you for all those conversations. And like you, it is impossible not to empathize with the stories that we hear from families who are in the oftentimes end-of-life situations, are dealing with significant chronic pain issues and the seizure issues. We know that, and I need to pause for a moment and look at my note here, not the cardholder stats that we know are overly inflated significantly that you quoted. Let's set all those folks aside because it would be, in my own non-medical opinion, almost impossible to quantify that those are all legitimate card-holding reasons based on simply the stats that you gave. But we can't throw everyone out because, as you indicated in your own testimony, there is a percentage of people that do qualify, and we know them in our own families, in our own communities. It's those folks, Chief, it's really, really difficult for me to just totally dismiss this bill as an elected official to say that it's not an issue that we need to deal with. I don't think that's fair. We're here to serve all the populations, and I know that that compassion and empathy that you have is there as well. What does that look like, and what does that path look like to do that? Maybe it's not this bill. Maybe it needs to start all over. But is there a path? My question, I guess, I should get to: is there a path or a lane that truly addresses the issue, that's tight as a tick, that doesn't create a gateway to legalize marijuana in this state, to truly address those issues? And I have to believe that there is, and I would appreciate your thoughts on that.
I want to say two things. First off, I want to say, Representative, I too am compassionate. People that know me and know me well, and I know there's probably a lot of people out there behind me right now that don't think I'm compassionate at all. But people that know me and know me well know how much I care for this state and the citizens of our state. And as you said, all the citizens of our state, those that are suffering from debilitating illness, disease, and those that are not. And my concern is as we introduce and we, as the General Assembly, when you pass laws, it makes people think, well, it must be okay. Everything's okay. How many more young people are going to try marijuana? How many more people are going to go to a doctor who's may not be as having integrity as some doctors and just going to write a prescription because I got pain, my knee hurts, my back hurts? And how many more young people are going to get addicted to high-potency marijuana, not the marijuana that was grown in the 70s, you know, it was 3%, but marijuana products today that, like I say, can be 90% THC. And so when I think about those that are in distress, I also think about all those young people out there that we need to not put our state in a position to where it looks like we're approving something, because I don't think this law is tight enough. And let me say this, and this is kind of one of my pet peeves about it, I guess. When you got people out there right now, and I know this, when the hemp law passed, we had farmers that got permits to grow hemp. And they got permits to grow hemp for one reason, because they were hoping South Carolina would pass a medical marijuana law or legalize marijuana at some point. When we start the commercialization of this in our state, there's going to be no slowing it down. And that's why we see so much marijuana today that we seize every day here in South Carolina that's coming from other states. And we see it through our interdiction efforts. And we see it through FedEx and UPS and U.S. Postal Service as we work these every single day. We're going to see the same thing, because it's going to be an overproduction. And if anybody thinks, like this law says, that we're going to destroy what we don't use, I wish I had something to sell them that was worth something, because that's not going to happen. We're going to see it on our streets, and we're going to see more young people trying something that they don't know what they're getting into. If we had, if we just allowed this for epilepsy and we narrowed that list down, and somehow or another, again, it was produced by Clemson University or produced to where we actually had total control over the growth of it, that would be one thing. But when we commercialize it and we make it a money-making thing, I'm telling you, we're going to lose complete control over it. And that's what's happened in every single state in the country. And again, the only thing I try to say is, let's not make the mistake that they made. I've heard some people say, well, Chief, we got it in 33 other states, so what's the difference? Well, we're learning what's happening in these 33 other states. We don't have to be like them. South Carolina is different. That's why people are moving here. It's why industry's coming here. But I can tell you, our job market don't support the number of jobs we're bringing right now. We need more. And I can tell you, marijuana is not going to help that situation. It's not going to help. And so if it was designed in a way that it was much more controlled than it is, then, and again, we're not commercializing it, where we're going to have 30 processing centers and 15 cultivation centers and possibly 130 therapeutic cannabis pharmacies, then, I would maybe not have the opposition I have to it. I have no opposition to it going through the process that again, the doctors are trying to go through the process to study it and let it be FDA approved. And the day that FDA approves it, you'll never see me on downtown again. I'll never be before another committee. I don't know if I've answered your question. I probably said too much. But.
Chief, you have not said too much, and you have answered my question, and we need you to do your job, and you do your job very well, and you are a critical stakeholder in this debate, in this conversation, in this decision-making, along with all of our sheriffs throughout the state and law enforcement. We need to have an open, candid conversation, continuing to try to challenge us to produce not just bills, but quality bills that are going to continue to move our state forward. And I thank you again for that. And maybe it's not this. I'm not interested in creating that infrastructure either, but I am interested in having that meaningful conversation to address what I think most people really want to address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief. I'd like to echo Mr. Smith's remarks and just say thank you, and we appreciate you. We appreciate all of the work, all of the time that you've put into being a great steward of South Carolina. And we hope you're there for a very long time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Sessions, did you? Sorry,
Yeah,
we do have one late arrival.
That's all right.
I want to echo those sentiments. Thank you, Chief, for all your service to this state. You mentioned those other states, those 30-some odd other states that have some sort of form of legalization. And you talked about, that veteran suicide rate, how that's risen in those 3 states here in this packet. Are there any other trends that you can enlighten the committee about, whether it's violent crime on the rise? Is there some other things that you can talk about that when these states have legalized some form of marijuana that brings some context to this conversation?
Well, one of the things that we've seen in some of the states that I hear my counterparts talking about is the fact that they have more robberies, because in many states it's all cash business. And so that's one of the things that they have to deal with, is they have more robberies, they have more homeless. The homeless, again, I think if you look at California, you look at Colorado, the homeless epidemic is just, again, unbelievable what's going on. And with that, you have a lot of minor crimes, because of homeless. We have, again, the black market effort that we see. We have Chinese in Colorado with illegal grows. And we see that in other states as well. And so it brings with it, again, it emboldens people to set up shop and grow marijuana, regardless of whether or not they have a permit or a license from the state. And again, I would tell you, I think probably every state that has either recreational or medicinal marijuana would tell you that they have those same problems.
Thank you, Chief. And lastly, I want to reiterate, you do support the medical testing or
Absolutely.
further tests in a controlled environment.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing today, and I've heard one of the gentlemen speak many times at these hearings. I think it's the first time I've heard Dr. Cutler speak, but absolutely. I think that I would encourage, and I've said before, I'd encourage the General Assembly to put more money into what these folks are doing, to try and find out what can be beneficial, to, what we can do with clinical trials. That this is not, it's not anecdotal information, but it's factual information that these guys are talking about. And that's what we should be focusing on. And because, again, one person can take something, and is it psychological that it helps, or is it really, is there real evidence? Is it evidence-based that this product is helping someone? And those are the answers that we need. And the only way we're going to do that is through our research and our scientists and clinical trials and the support of NIH and other, medical institutions, helping them do what they do.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Seabrook. And then after Dr. Seabrook, we have Dr. Paul Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I want to thank the committee for allowing me to testify about the Compassionate Care Act. And let me tip my hat to the researchers at USC. It is wonderful hearing what they're doing there, and I think the future is bright for this. My name is Mark Seabrook. I am speaking as an individual, as a physician, and as a citizen of this state. By way of background, I'm originally from Anderson. I graduated Wofford College and then the University of South Carolina School of Medicine. I've been in private practice as a gastroenterologist for over 32 years with consultants in gastroenterology. We have offices in Lexington and Richland counties. I've served in leadership positions with the South Carolina Medical Association, the South Carolina Gastroenterology Association, and the American College of Gastroenterology. I've had the opportunity to serve as doctor of the day for over 20 years, and maybe I'm best known for the guy that has dropped off the toilet paper, recognizing colon cancer awareness. I love being a physician, and I love living in South Carolina. As I mentioned, I'm a gastroenterologist, and I continue to work full-time. I'm not an addiction specialist. I'm not in pain therapy. I'm not an expert on all the mechanisms of action of marijuana or the endocannabinoid system. I do consider myself an expert in the field of gastroenterology. We deal with patients with inflammatory bowel disease and digestive complaints every day. The Compassionate Care Act has been an item of interest for a number of years now for physicians, and many of us, including myself, have testified on this subject here. No doubt this subject is controversial and at times emotional. Though a majority of states have passed medicinal or recreational use of marijuana, I do not believe this bill, and it's been modified from where it started, should be passed in its current form. Marijuana is not a medicine. It is a plant, and I thought it had 400 compounds. Now I'm hearing it has 500 compounds. Medicines are generally prescribed by physicians that have 1, maybe 2 compounds in specific quantities. This is not the case with marijuana. Marijuana is a Schedule I drug. That's what we've talked about. I totally support, and the physician community totally supports that being changed by the FDA. This bill specifically lists on page 5 that it lists Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis as 2 of the first 7 things that it is used for. I'm a gastroenterologist. We are the experts in these diseases. I go to national meetings every year and from physicians from around the world. And to date, I've seen 1 seminar on 1 meeting about 4 years ago that talked about clinical use of marijuana. This is simply not on our radar screen at all. In fact, what we do as gastroenterologists is deal with the side effects, something called cannabis-induced hyperemesis. And this is when generally it's seen demographically in young males who use marijuana routinely. They get admitted to the hospital for days and have to be put on antipsychotic medications to even get them over it. Indeed, there are a number of conditions that are listed in the DSM-5 that specifically relate to marijuana's use and abuse. And you're going to hear other speakers regarding the strong association of psychosis and other mental health issues related to the long-term use of cannabis. There are thousands of articles that have been written about marijuana and cannabis use. To my knowledge, there's no significant conclusive studies for the treatment really of any diseases, though we have wonderful medications now that are derived from marijuana. Yes, individuals clearly have benefited from cannabis use in terms of relieving some distressing symptoms and improved quality of life in dire circumstances. But this is, in my opinion, not enough to justify making this drug more readily available to those complaining of what would be considered occasionally nebulous conditions. I do intend to keep my mind open as science moves forward, and as what we're doing at University of South Carolina. I was intrigued to hear all the forward motion by Dr. Cutler that will benefit our patients without the significant untoward side effects. But in the meantime, I don't think this is in the best interest of South Carolina. I'm going to piggyback on Chief Keels a bit. As I mentioned, I'm speaking as a citizen also. I love South Carolina. I love telling my physicians when I go to national meetings about our state. And quite frankly, I am proud that we continue to be one of the states that has not gone down this path. I see patients routinely that have moved here from different parts of the country, and they're moving here for good reasons. They're moving here because of the way we think and the way we act. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure I want them moving here because we've passed legislation regarding the legalization, decriminalization, or commercialization of marijuana. As the limit of my comments, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm really good with diarrhea and heartburn especially.
Thank you, Dr. Seabrook. We appreciate your work in that area. We all may need your help every once in a while. Anyone have any questions for Dr. Seabrook? I think you get a pass.
Okay.
Thank you.
For that, I'm grateful, I suspect.
We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Paul Coleman. He's online. Dr. Coleman?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Paul Coleman. I've been a pharmacist for 14 years in retail setting, 3 different large chains. I don't want to address some of the things that we've already heard, maybe towards the end. I'll kind of go through what I think and hope to paint a picture of and lessen some of the fear we have in the process that this is going to go. The way this bill is written, first, I'm in favor of the way this bill is written. I'm not in favor of recreational cannabis. In fact, I think that this is, with rescheduling or descheduling federally I think it's probably coming at some point. This is the perfect bill to get ahead of that. Without this bill, it's going to be wide open for anything else to come out. So I'd like to start with that. The next step, I just want to paint the picture. You've already met, if you're a patient, you've met with your doctor, you've developed a treatment plan. And you've gone to your pharmacy. They've issued how much you can have in a 14-day period. You show your ID to get into the cannabis pharmacy. It's one-on-one consultation with a pharmacist. You go through drug-drug interactions, drug-disease state interactions, and develop specific patient goals for that patient. They also follow up with you every 2 weeks, or they can call you, as you know, you can call your pharmacist anytime on the phone. There is no raw plant flower in this bill. There's no 500 different cannabinoids or different entities coming out of the flower. And this pharmacy is going to be regulated by and oversaw by both the Board of Pharmacy and DHEC, which isn't any different than any pharmacy now. Those processes are already in place. The main goal for all of these patients is to improve their quality of life. So maybe that means decreasing their other meds. Maybe it means sleeping better, going to the bathroom if they want to take off on their opioids. I know chronic pain is a majority of the patients that may be seen, but turning them and taking them out of this bill would be a slap in the face, really, to anyone affected by the opioid epidemic. If they can have some relief and decrease some of their opioids by taking medical cannabis, maybe they get to go to the bathroom that day, maybe they sleep a little bit better, maybe they just have a better day or a better life going forward, because you can't constantly increase your pain meds for the rest of your life. And it just doesn't work as you go forward. The longer you take those pain meds, the less they work for you. It's kind of a perfect scenario. It'll be a more secure, smooth running pharmacy. Every patient in there is going to be getting the same treatment, the same medicine. They're in the same place. There's not any interruptions. And you're able to focus more just on them and develop better goals for their life. When the medication leaves the pharmacy, it's not any different from any other pharmacy. It's in child safety packages, it may be in a bottle. It's only for use for that patient, and it's not any different from when it leaves a regular retail pharmacy. The main difference would be is if, someone shows up, they will see their doctor every 90 days for their narcotic. And when they leave with a bottle full of morphine, which has very high dependency. Cannabis has been shown to have moderate to low dependency. But the problem with opioids, morphine, and as we know with the opioid epidemic, so the active dose for morphine is much closer to the lethal dose. It's much more dangerous, yet we dispense hundreds, thousands of them every day. The active dose, it's probably about 100 times closer. Morphine is, the active dose is closer to the lethal dose. So you accidentally take 2 instead of 1, and that could be enough, or 2 or 3. And that's why Narcan's gone over the counter now. That's why every script for 5 Norco comes in with a script for Narcan for doctors covering themselves. As far as what's readily available in pharmacies, we talked about Marinol, which is dronabinol, and the Epidiolex, which is CBD. In 14 years, I have never seen Epidiolex in a retail pharmacy. As we discussed earlier, its cost, it normally isn't. I've never seen it covered by insurance, so that's why we probably have never ordered it. Marinol or dronabinol is not available. It is an FDA-approved drug, which is the THC version. And so Epidiolex is mostly for seizure disorders, especially in children. THC, most commonly, we get it for cancer patients, chemo patients that are wasting away and don't have an appetite, and helps with nausea and vomiting. I haven't had an order of Marinol or dronabinol come in to any pharmacy I've worked in over a year, probably about 18 months. It's not available. So those 2 options are non-existent in retail pharmacy as far as my 14 years of experience. Let's see. So, and with this bill, these medications will be easily available and cheaper. I'm not sure about dronabinol. It may be about the same price as some edibles or oral forms. The Epidiolex is out of control, and a tincture of that can be made much cheaper and dispensed from a medical cannabis pharmacy. The last thing I really wanted to say is most of the opposition seems to be aimed at recreational cannabis, which I would agree with that. As far as taking or consuming cannabis and leading on to worse or harder drugs, I haven't come across a study that shows that people responsibly using it in a medical setting, just like anyone that abuses opioids, they do that in a responsible setting. But if you're going to be getting your cannabis, or you're a 16-year-old getting marijuana from a drug dealer on the street, they're not going to stop there. They're not going to stop until you buy fentanyl, or heroin, or coke, or meth. That's not what's going on in this case. This is medicine. It's the only thing we're doing. It's in regulated doses, and you have follow-up with a pharmacist every 2 weeks to help adjust the way you take it, maybe decrease or kick out some of your other medicines so that you can have a better quality of life. I heard, not crooked, but bad doctors. I don't want to live in a world where I go to work every day having to worry or live in fear of crooked doctors out there over-prescribing certain medicines. Those doctors get caught. We've seen it happen. The DEA shuts them down. That's not something I like to think about on a regular basis. I don't think that in this bill, there's no encouragement for that. And it's not as addictive or dependent as opioids that some of these clinics that have been shut down are. And I think that is most of what I have. I really think that this bill, the way it's written, is perfect for the pharmacist patient situation to help them. There's no plant, there's no smokable flower. It's dispensed just like any other medicine that comes from a retail pharmacy. And I really do think that it's a way to get ahead of the federal policy, whether it's rescheduled or descheduled completely. If it's descheduled completely, then there's not much that we're going to be able to control after that. It would be just like alcohol or tobacco, and we can control if it's sold on Sunday or what age you can buy it in, but it'll be everywhere after that. So I will end on that, and I hope to answer, I hope that there's questions.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Do we have any questions? I don't think so. Thank you for your patience with us this afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have to jump off, but please pass my email or anything on to anyone, any of the other members or representatives that might have questions going forward.
Okay, we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next up, we have Jeff Moore with the South Carolina Sheriff's Association. Did he? Okay, then we'll go with Ms. Tashika Curtis-Pugh, South Carolina Nurses Association. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone, esteemed members of the House. My name is Tashika Curtis-Pugh, and it is my honor and privilege to be before you today. I serve the 80,000 plus nurses in the state of South Carolina, both registered and advanced practice nurses in our state, as the executive director of the South Carolina Nurses Association. Let me be clear, let me be very open and upfront to say that we support this bill. The nurses of South Carolina support this bill. Excuse me. Today, my reason for being here is very simple. I'm a nurse, I'm a caregiver, I'm a clinician, and I am an advocate. As a registered nurse of over 2 decades of experience in healthcare in settings from acute care to hospice, I have seen more than my fair share of patients who have endured pain and debilitating symptoms from illnesses, many of which have been terminal. One such patient is personal. He was my uncle, my mother's only sibling. On March 29th of 2024, my family and I transitioned him to hospice due to a terminal diagnosis. He is a resident of New York State, where medical cannabis is legal and accessible. As a clinician who's seen the benefits of medical cannabis for patients in chronic pain, one of my immediate suggestions to my family was that we started him on a controlled THC management to manage his symptoms. He has gone from pain topping 9 out of 10 to now less than 2 out of 10, and on many days he has no pain at all. The converse of his story is a 43-year-old single mother that I had the honor and privilege of taking care of here in South Carolina as I still work as a hospice nurse. This mother had a 7-year-old son and had been diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, which had quickly metastasized to the rest of her body. She was in such severe pain that she was unable to clearly make arrangements for her son's care. She had been prescribed multiple narcotic medications and had maxed out on those medications. Those medications caused her to be extremely lethargic and also constipated. And if anyone has ever suffered constipation, you know how painful that alone can be. Imagine trying to prepare your child for your transition and not being able to think clearly, not being able to enjoy those final moments with your child due to the severity of your pain and other symptoms. No person should suffer like that. Yet stories like this in our state are not uncommon. We have the opportunity to give our patients compassionate care that allows them to be lucid enough to be mentally present through some of the most challenging moments of their lives. For the last 20 years, the American Nurses Association has stood firm on its support of the use of medical cannabis and related cannabinoids for the therapeutic use of symptom control and management. This position does not extend to the current debate on legalization of recreational use in any way. The position was formed out of evidence-based and backed research that proves the efficacy of treatment outcomes for those using medical cannabis. Furthermore, the American Nurses Association officially recognized cannabis nursing as a nursing practice specialty in 2023. This specialty requires specialized knowledge and competencies to navigate and address the stigma associated with medical cannabis use. As the state's premier association for nurses, we mirror this position of the American Nurses Association. We sincerely believe that it is a shared responsibility of professional nursing organizations to speak for the nurses collectively in shaping healthcare and promulgate change, excuse me, I apologize, for the improvement of health and healthcare. Therefore, the SCNA strongly supports the passage of this bill as it is currently written. To Dr. Coleman's point, it does get ahead of any changes that may come from federal legislation. Medical cannabis and related cannabinoids are widely used to treat disease or alleviate symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, often due to chemotherapy in our cancer patients, stimulating appetite in HIV patients, alleviating chronic pain, easing spasticity due to multiple sclerosis, managing symptoms of epilepsy, decreasing symptoms of depression, anxiety, helping with sleep disorders and other psychosis, and relieving intraocular pressure for glaucoma. As of April 2023, 38 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia currently allow the use of medical cannabis products, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. We believe that it's time for South Carolina to be added to the states that put compassionate care at the forefront of medical provisions of care and allow the use of medical cannabis for the people of our great state. I will yield all time at this point because I know we've had a long day and ask if there's any questions.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here this afternoon. We appreciate your patience. Do we have any questions? I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Mr. Jeff Moore with the South Carolina Sheriff's Association, retired. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Moore. I am the former director of the South Carolina Sheriff's Association, which I'm sure now has my former friends at SLED's ears burning. They knew I was probably going to be here. I held that position for 32 years, literally half my life. I took that job at the age of 32 and retired at 64. So you might wonder why in the world would somebody who spent half his life representing a law enforcement organization, which I did happily, proudly, and as best as I could for those 32 years, why would I be here in support of this piece of legislation? Well, I'm not here to wow you with scientific insights. I'm not here to wow you with all kinds of statistics about what kids group is doing this and what that group is doing that. I'm here to relate to you my personal story. And I know for Chief Keel, anecdotes don't mean a lot. But my anecdote is personal, really personal. My son, this is a paradox, my son was an up-and-coming young golfer in South Carolina. He was a straight-A student. He was academically and athletically gifted. He made the high school golf team when he was 12 years old and still in middle school. And some SOB, when he made that team, turned him on to marijuana. And at 15, well, at 12, 13, 14, 15, our family blew up. He finally dropped out of school at 16. Now, he stopped using marijuana at 15 because he realized it was screwing his life up. So he replaced it with alcohol, a legal drug, not for him, but neither was the marijuana, but that didn't stop him with either one. In the end, he ended up joining the Army. at 18. When I asked him, why in the world would you do that? Because you know where you're going next, and that's overseas, and he did. He said, Dad, I don't have any self-discipline, I don't have any self-respect, I don't have any purpose in life, and the Army will give it to me. And they did. So he went to Fort Benning, Georgia as an 18-year-old, the day before my birthday, or the day after my birthday, 2018, and was deployed to Iraq as a 19-year-old, or as an 18-year-old in November of that year. In January of that year, or 2008, he was deployed in 2007, he was deployed to Iraq. And on January 28th of 2008, as I sat at my desk responding to email at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the first words out of the NPR reporter's mouth were, 5 Americans died in Mosul, Iraq yesterday. That's exactly where my son was. I froze. I went to my email and I emailed him. Well, actually, I BlackBerried him. We don't have those anymore. The next day, I got a response. Dad, I was there. It was my patrol. I watched them die. And indeed, I've actually seen a video. The Army actually put a drone in the sky that day to videotape the ambush that his patrol suffered. 5 of his best friends died that day. Either we're having an earthquake. We've moved to Lugoff, South Carolina. For those of you who are local, you know what I mean by that. Or something weird is going on outside. But that day, his patrol was in the longest sustained firefight since the Marines went into Fallujah in 2006. The leading Humvee was blown to pieces. All 5 crewmen aboard were killed, 5 of his best friends. He was 19 years old. It was his first time in combat. He performed admirably to the point where he was recommended by his captain for the Bronze Star, but they don't give Bronze Stars to specialists. So he got the Army Commendation Medal with Valor. He eventually came home, and a year later, he was redeployed right back to Iraq. On this occasion, as a 20-year-old, they were on patrol one night. He was with a special unit that hunted down bomb makers in Mosul. This time he was in southern Iraq. They had been taking fire from a particular house for days and days. And his commanding officer said, basically came to the conclusion we had to take that house down. So he and his platoon were given the responsibility of clearing the house. They went in the first floor. It was a 2-story house. Went in the first floor, secured it, and the only person they found was a young woman in her 20s. And then the lieutenant told my son, take 2 men upstairs and clear the upstairs. And being the senior non-commissioned officer, by this time he was a specialist, he went upstairs with 2 men. He led the 2 others up, threw 2 fragment grenades into the first room and rushed it, because they'd heard furniture being moved, much like you're hearing something outside. They assumed it was the bad guys. It wasn't. It was a 6-year-old girl who was trying to move a dresser to hide behind. You have any idea what 2 fragment grenades can do to a 6-year-old child? He was 19 or 20 years old. And he walked into that room and looked at what he had done. It still makes me want to cry. Then he had to walk downstairs, and the woman they had detained downstairs was that child's mother. And he had to walk up to her and tell her what he had just done. When he eventually came home, he was a wreck. He was an utter wreck. I didn't react this way 5 years ago when I first testified on this bill. But he was a wreck. He was mentally, emotionally defeated. Eventually, he was deployed a third time, but this time was to Korea, which was to be his downfall. You see, when you go to Iraq, there's no alcohol. But in Korea, it flows like water. And in the end, he was given a medical discharge, an honorable medical discharge, because of really his drinking. But it was PTSD, traumatic brain injury, which he suffered because he got blown up so many times by IEDs. They took the first zombie out with a 200-pound IED, killing all aboard. So he left the Army. And he came home to Michigan. Well, he came home to South Carolina. By that time, he was married. He had 2 children. Her parents lived in Michigan. They have, guess what? Medical marijuana. His father-in-law was using medical marijuana. And what did he do for a living? He was a retired colonel in the United States Army. He had done 2 or 3 tours in Vietnam. So my son was in and out of rehabilitation centers, facilities. And I'm trying to recall all this. I had less than a day to prepare for this. Otherwise I would have. You do have written remarks that I sent the staff. But to make a long story short, and I know it's been a long day, and thank you for taking me out of order. I'm going to miss my doctor's appointment, but I hope I live. The point is, he started to use medical marijuana about 2 years after he got back and moved to Michigan. That marijuana saved his life. I'm not going to talk about all the anecdotes of other people. I'm not going to talk about statistics. We're going to get into some of that a little bit later. I'm going to talk about my son, who was on the edge of death on more than one occasion, not from smoking marijuana, but from drinking alcohol and suffering from alcohol poisoning. He was taken to the hospital in an ambulance 3 times. 3 times. Because of alcohol poisoning. But the marijuana intervened. It gave him a relief from the nightmares, the grief, the constant tears, and gave him a chance to put his life back together. Now fast forward, what has happened to this young 20-year-old, 21, 22-year-old veteran? Today he's 36 years old. He's married to his second wife, who is a wonderful woman. He has finished a 4-year degree in psychology and sociology from Eastern Michigan University. And guess what he does for a job? Part of his degree required him to go to participate in an internship for a year. And he got paired up with an alcohol and drug abuse rehabilitation program. So that's what he does. He works with families and individuals, sons and daughters, moms and dads, who have substance abuse problems. And they hired him before he graduated because they said, this guy knows something. And he knows it because he's been through it, he's lived it, and he's come out the other end. Wouldn't you want that for your son? Wouldn't you? I couldn't be more proud of him. I couldn't. Now, let's talk about something a little bit more, even closer to home. Mark was talking about, I'm sorry, Chief, oh, he's got none left. Chief was talking about a video that he would like to show you about a woman who lost her son. She said she still wished he would be here, but he overdosed. Well, my wife worked down here in that building with the dome on it across the street for 13 years. She was the legislative liaison for the Department of Corrections. Some of you might, well, as I look around this table, there are very few of you I remember. I retired almost 10 years ago now. When I come down here, which is really, really rare, I rarely recognize anybody. He was the only person I recognized on that, at that table, or that your positions. Well, I wish he was here too, because she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Now, Parkinson's won't kill you. It just makes your life utterly miserable. And we knew it wouldn't kill her. But the fall she had broke 2 arms, a wrist, a finger, and gave her 2 brain hemorrhages. That's not what killed her. At the same time, she suffered from Lewy body dementia. That's what killed her. She died last September on the 13th at home in our bed. And the whole time she took, I actually still have all of her meds because I don't know what to do with them. I don't want to flush them down the toilet because it get into the water supply. I can't find anybody to take them off my hands. My doctor, I took them to him and he said, no, we don't do that. I don't know who does that. But I was going to bring the bag of medications down here and I forgot to bring it because I wanted you to see what she had to take 3 to 5 times a day. It would have, if I put the bottles up here, it would have been like this, bottle to bottle. She lived off medication. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But the one thing that she couldn't take was marijuana, at least not legally. That's my personal story. That's why I support this piece of legislation. And let me make it clear, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, this is about medical marijuana. Virtually everything you heard Chief Keel talk about was illegal use of illegal marijuana. It kind of reminded me of the lady who testified before a Senate subcommittee several years ago against the bill. And you want to know why she was against it? Because while she lived in Greenville, she used marijuana on a multiple times a day. Because why? It was illegal. It was absolutely illegal for her to do it. But she had unrestricted access to an unrestricted amount of marijuana on a daily basis. When she moved to Columbia, her source dried up, so she turned to alcohol and became an alcoholic. She blames it on the marijuana, devolving all responsibility of her personal conduct to the dealer. Virtually everything that Chief Keel told you, statistically, is probably absolutely accurate. The one thing he keeps leaving out of those statistics is they're all based on the illegal use, or virtually all based on the illegal use of marijuana. My son used marijuana on a daily basis for 3 years. Between the time he was 12 and 15, he never had, and you know how I found out about it? He got caught at school, in high school with it. And I got a call from the resource officer. Imagine the resource officer is calling the South Carolina Sheriff's Association to talk to the director, to tell the director, me, I've just taken your child into custody. Can you come get him? Can you come get him? That's how I found out. But the point is, he used daily, and it was illegal every time he did it. He had no problem getting it. It's probably the most abused drug in America. It's also probably the most studied plant on the earth. One doctor's still here, the other doctor had to leave. I asked him before he left, I said, well, okay, you've been studying marijuana for 40 years. The world's been studying marijuana for probably longer. How many more studies do we need? I mean, penicillin wasn't studied for 40 years before they put it on the market. The polio vaccine wasn't studied for 40 years before they made it available. Thank goodness. I was born in 1950, right in the middle of the polio outbreak. And you're all so young. I'm 74, so everybody under about 50 is young to me. The point is, this plant has been studied and studied and studied around the world. 39 states, by my last count, have made it available for medical purposes, and most of those states have now gone recreational, which I do not support because I've seen the damage it can do. But let me tell you something. Law enforcement has been fighting the drug war for, 90 years or more? And guess what? They're still fighting it. They haven't put an end to it. I've even talked to people who believe they haven't put a dent in it. But they keep fighting it, and they keep fighting it. And I guess, we were in Afghanistan for 10 years. I guess we'll be fighting drugs for another 90 years. 90 years and 90 years. I'm not advocating legalizing drugs. Let's not all get excited about that. But as far as marijuana is concerned, it's been studied. And I've been coming down here for about 7 years now, working on this piece of legislation. And all I hear is, we need to study it. We need to study it. It needs more study. Well, think about the 40 years that the doctor from USC told you he'd been studying it. And think of all the countries and all the medical communities across the globe that have been studying marijuana. How many more studies do we need? It's time we put it to use legally. Now, Chief Keel mentioned that 6% of South Carolinians think that FDA approval should be accomplished before it was made legal. Well, actually, 86%, I think, 3%, 6% of South Carolinians believe it should be made available medically. Then you've asked the question, well, should it be FDA approved? 76% said yes. And then when you explain what FDA approval or rescheduling means, they go, oh. Once they understand the process, that number doesn't stand. Because it's a long process. If it was that bloody easy, don't you think the FDA would have moved on it already? When 39 states have already made it legal, not just medically, but recreationally? yet it stays a Class 3 drug. Representative Pace, you asked about the FDA approval. It's on a Schedule 1 drug, right up there with heroin. Heroin. Do you know why it's a Schedule 1 drug? You do know why? You think you know why? I'm going to tell the rest of the committee. In 1972, John Ehrlichman was Richard Nixon's domestic advisor. Most of you are so young you don't even know who John Ehrlichman was. Sir, he ended up going to prison. But John, and this was from an interview, and I could have brought you the direct, like I say, I didn't have time to prepare really. I just found out about this yesterday. But John Ehrlichman was interviewed by Harper's Magazine years later, back in the 90s, and was asked about the rescheduling or the scheduling of marijuana. Richard Nixon had put together a blue ribbon committee to look into this. And the Blue Ribbon Committee came back and said, no, don't schedule it. Just leave it as it is. But John Ehrlichman said there were two groups of people in America. There was the African American community, and there were the anti-war community. And famously he said, well, you couldn't make it out against the law to be black, and you couldn't make it against the law to protest the war. So what do? You marginalize them by taking the one drug that they all used back in the 60s, and you put it on Schedule 1, making it absolutely illegal to use. And there it has remained since 72, I guess, where it remains to this day. Now, as to why 39 states have made it legal to use for medical purposes, and why some have even made it legal for recreational purposes, as my son's state has, Michigan. It's because the federal government doesn't enforce their own laws. They just don't. Matter of fact, there was an amendment to the budget that stands in the federal budget today that basically prohibits the DEA from enforcing federal marijuana drug laws. That's fact. I mean, don't you think we got bigger things to worry about? You asked, Madam Chairman, about the form you fill out for a gun purchase. That, and Chief Keel was right. There are about 11 questions. Some of them are pretty obvious. Have you been convicted of a felony? Have you been convicted of this or that or the other? One is drug use, one is alcohol use, and one is have you ever been determined to be mentally ill? Well, you know, I guess you signed that piece of paper with your fingers crossed behind your back, or at least one hand crossed behind your back, because let's face it, nobody is looking at those applications or those forms. Now, if you get caught, there's a penalty to be paid. There's a penalty to be paid. But alcohol abuse is one of those, and probably alcohol is the most abused drug in America, and it is a drug. Make no mistake about it. As far as marijuana, as I said earlier, it's probably the most abused illegal drug in the nation. And if you don't believe me, walk down Columbia one night. You know, the largest construction project in Columbia in the 50 years I've lived here is student housing. Have you seen that? I mean, there's, you know, student housing apartments are popping up like mushrooms. We could talk about mushrooms, but they're popping up like mushrooms. Well, the other night, I went to the Philharmonic at the Kroger Center, and I had to park about 4 blocks from the Kroger Center. But I had to walk by student housing. And the smell of marijuana was so thick in the air that I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. In fact, there were 4 college students, I assume they were college students, walking in front of me to another event behind the Koger Center smoking marijuana. And it wasn't broad daylight, it was pitch dark. But I mean, really? We talk about how awful it is. We talk about how debilitating it is. It's a threshold drug. So are cigarettes. That's what my son started on at the age of 12. I don't smoke. His mother didn't smoke, but he had to. I know we're running out of time, and I'm
Mr. Moore,
I'm-
thank you so much for your heartfelt testimony.
Well, I just want, again, to emphasize, this is about regulated and about quantifiable amounts of THC in the product. This is not about having a party using a bong. My son's dose was 28 grams a month. That's less than an ounce. And when he ran out, it was gone until the next month. Somebody asked about insurance. I think it was you, Representative Pace. He has had a marijuana card through Michigan, but insurance didn't pay for it. He paid for it out of pocket, and he could ill afford it. This is not a blank check. This is something that's going to be used carefully, because if you do need it, and yes, there will be bad actors. I know there's bad actors everywhere. I work for some of them, for heaven's sakes. But the good can outweigh the bad, and I would ask you to look at this medical bill very carefully. Don't discount it just because. Give it serious consideration. And I'll
Thank
take
you.
any questions you
you.
might have. And I'm sorry I rambled.
No, that's fine. And we appreciate the service of your son. And I know you are very, very proud of him. He's come a very long way, it sounds like, and it sounds like he's thriving. And so thank you for sharing that encouraging story to all of us.
Well, it's a happy ending.
Representative Cox, do you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Real quick, I appreciate the story about your son. I was actually in Iraq during that same time period, so I was in the Baghdad area. So I might have remembered that certain attack that you talked about in the very beginning, but I just want to make sure we really appreciate all the testimony and everything, but you're here as a private citizen, you're not representing the
Oh,
Sheriff's
no.
Association.
Like
Okay.
I say, I am retired.
Okay, just wanted to clear that up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I am a private citizen.
Thank you. Next, we have up Mr. Eddie Myers, Dr. Myers. Thank you.
Hello, y'all. I wasn't aware of the format. I would have did a better preparation for my statements, but I am Eddie Myers. I'm a physician in Sumter and Manning, South Carolina. I run a couple urgent cares. It's a little different than, I've been in South Carolina for 18 years, practicing physician, was in the Air Force prior to that. I started getting into addiction medicine. Ann Curvin ran Clarendon Behavioral Health. I did some training for Suboxone. At that point, you had to be trained, but honestly, the training online did not give me much information about addiction, and I did not get into treating folks with opiate addicts until about a year, because no one in Clarendon County was prescribing opiates at the time. So I started doing that, and it's been wonderful overall. I mean, those folks are in bad shape. I want to make it clear that I'm against the bill. I mean, already the gastroenterologist, I think he was the only other practicing physician that was here besides myself. And he said like two of the things on it, like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, like he's like, that's not even, but it's already on this bill, which doesn't make sense to him or I. You know, one of the things the first physician, or not physician, the PhD was talking about studying marijuana, and the other, I think, PhD here. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I got into medicine because I want to find the truth. I think science is incredible. I think, you know, that some of the studies they're doing are going to lead us to things that are really going to help folks. But as far as like some of the panel was asking about receptors, it's like we have opiate nicotine receptors in our bodies too. So just because we have receptors doesn't mean we should hitting them with a sledgehammer all the time. And so, you know, I'm like, we know what happened to the opiate, you know, pandemic. I was around when they said, you need opiates. People have pain, you need to treat pain, you treat pain. And now we have, you know, our children are dying by the groves of opiate addiction. I deal with it every day. So, you know, we need, and once again, the other practicing physician clearly stated, this isn't a drug, this is a plant. And although they said it's been studied and studied and studied, the one gentleman said there's 500 different chemicals in it. I know I recently listened to a PhD that was talking about 70 different psychoactive chemicals in it. So to me, it's very arrogant that the Senate kind of, you know, supersedes the FDA and says we're going to approve 70 psychoactive drugs all at once. No studies. I mean, you know, they're going to find the cannabinoids, and we have cannabinoids for seizures. They say it's expensive, but a lot of times, if you get a physician or neurologist that keeps pushing, you can get these medications, you know, approved, and insurance will pay for it. It takes a lot. Sometimes it takes a lot. But I talked to neurologists. I should have said I'm part of Colonial Family Practice in Sumter and Manning and in Columbia, and we have a neurologist on board, and I asked him about it, and he said he was on a cannabinoid panel, and he said he's against this bill, by the way, but he says, you know, once again, the cannabinoid, you know, hitting the cannabinoid receptor probably is going to help, and it shows it helps with some seizures. But why they want to do medical marijuana, my take is I want to put medical marijuana, because why wouldn't you want to give a drug that has THC in it that's also addictive? Now, the one gentleman said real low doses of THC, you know, may be helpful. But that's why we put it in a pill. That's why we say milligrams. That's why you try to identify what psychoactive substances happen. That's why, like, we don't give a fungus when you have a strep throat. Even though penicillin comes from a fungus, we give you penicillin. And the one gentleman said we didn't study penicillin. Well, we did study the fungus until we found out actually what was killing the bacteria was the penicillin. And so, you know, some of the negative aspects, and I think this is the real truth of the matter is, and so it's going to be highly regulated. I mean, you all know. I assume most of you guys are probably attorneys. You know, I don't know if you know any attorneys that probably take cases they shouldn't. I know physicians throughout my life that have prescribed medications they shouldn't. You know, to say that somebody, a physician, nurse practitioner, isn't going to say you have PTSD, depression, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, whatever it be, and say, yeah, here's your drug. I was talking to a medical assistant before I came. She's from New York, and she said in New York, you can do telehealth. It's telehealth. So it doesn't take a bunch of bad actors. It takes one bad actor. And you talk about the negative aspects of marijuana. It does take long to figure out. If you take marijuana, you know, as a teenager, New Zealand did a study of 30 years, your IQ is 8 points lower. I show my children, when I say my children, I try to treat them as my kids. They're my patients. I tell my own kids that too. I have 4 children, but you know, they have no idea that. They have no idea that what they're using, putting in their body over and over again, is decreasing their brain. I told them, I showed them, this is an SAT out of 600 points. Your IQ is 100, you know, on average. You know, 140, you're a genius, and 70, you're mentally handicapped. It's like, you are significantly making yourself dumber the rest of your life from what we can see. Even proponents like, you know, I want to listen to podcasts like Joe Rogan that are pro-marijuana. He says, this is not for kids. And you're saying, well, I'm not going to give it to kids. But you should not legitimize it. You should look at each individual chemicals, listen to this guy's research. He's going to do, you know, hopefully he'll patent some part of the drug that, just like they did with the epilepsy drug they have out there, and give that. Don't just, say all these people can have it. Memory loss, schizophrenia. It's funny how people know themselves. I had a couple of schizophrenics a few years ago, and they told me about 10 years ago, and they said, I was fine until I started smoking marijuana. I mean, these are blatantly schizophrenics, seeing things, hearing things aren't there. They're not productive in society. They have no life, and and they told me that, and I was like, it's about the, teenage years, about the same time as schizophrenia. And now all of a sudden you look at the studies, and then one of the studies I read, 30% of schizophrenics now, they say it probably would have been avoided if they did not use marijuana. So when you all I know you guys are in the medical board, but when you all do this, I mean, I was talking to a representative at some political event, and he was, saying, we're going to get this money, and we're going to do this, and blah, blah, blah. I said, it's on you. Like, if you do this, and when one of your constituents comes to you and says, my kid has schizophrenia, it's on you. I mean, this is on you. This is important decisions. I tell my patients, I'm like, I'd rather get cancer than schizophrenia. The rest of your life, non-productive, seeing things, paranoia. I was talking to a gentleman not too long ago, real nice guy, and we're just sitting there talking, and sometimes I just want to talk to my patients and take a break. And so I was talking to him, and we started talking about drugs. And he said, you know what, my daughter, I said, just be careful of what marijuana you use, because they can lace it. And he's like, I'm okay with her doing marijuana. And I said, I'm not a fan. I see a lot of problems with it. And I said, well, how's she doing? He said, well, Doc, she's kind of like won't leave her house anymore. She kind of starts telling me she's hearing like things and seeing things. And I'm like, she needs to see a mental health specialist. I mean, she's got paranoia. She got schizophrenia probably. And he has no idea. Why is there not billboards all over the place saying this? I think because there's so much money. There's so much money involved. I think the gastroenterologist talked about cannabis hyperemesis. I was looking at that. When you read about it, it doesn't even talk about cannabis hyperemesis much. And I read the one thing off of one of the government websites, and it said, well, rarely under the age of 50. Rarely. I talked to my medical assistants today, and they were like, this ain't rare. By no means. We see it every month. In fact, I had a guy that was 50-some years old the other day, and I probably wouldn't even order the urine drug screen. He came in with intermittent vomiting, and he looked kind of like me, 50 years old, gray hair, sitting there, and he's telling me about this intermittent vomiting. His primary care, great physician, I know him well, and I said, how much marijuana do you use? And he's like, I don't. And I said, well, it's in your drug screen. And he's, well, I get these gummies to help me sleep. Which the chief was talking about, the Delta 9s, which is straight up marijuana. All my folks with opiate that they tell me they do Delta 8s. I mean, I don't know how that's still in the streets, but it is. But anyway, he has probably cannabis hyperemesis. We see it all the time. So it affects people and puts people in the hospital. What else? Addiction. Most of the physicians I know, the good physicians I know, are writing less and less addictive medications, no matter what it is, benzodiazepine, opiates. I think it's clear now that marijuana is addictive. I don't think there's anybody questioning that's not addictive. So if you medically give it to somebody that's 18, 19, 20, I mean, there's a very good chance that they're never going to get off it or have a hard time getting off that medication, or I should say medication, that drug. And so, so for all those, what else was I going to say? Well, the other thing is, as far as the chief was talking about, and then the gastroenterologist too, also love their state. And I'm originally from Ohio, don't hold it against me. I was in the Air Force, my wife didn't go back because of the weather. But I love South Carolina. I've had several folks that move down. They often come to urgent care, they don't have a provider, they need some medication. And I've had several folks that are getting prescribed marijuana from other states. And I will tell you that I know the one gentleman testified, and I'm glad his son is doing great, but I could tell you, in my experience, all of them were not really contributing to society. All of them were, on government assistance. They were coming here, and all of them did not stay. And I know as legislators, I mean, those aren't the folks that are getting jobs, being productive members of society. And I don't mean to be heartless. I try to love everyone, but it is. I mean, I've seen it happen. I've seen them move back. they don't want to come here. So as representatives, you got to understand that that is part of it. And they always, they keep talking about the seizures, and I know I mean, they have a medication for that. I don't understand why that's the only heartbreaking situation. But even my neurologist that I talked to, he said maybe in some situations that the cannabinoid, but there's a medication for that, and that's what we do, right? You isolate the chemical, you put it in a milligram, you do studies on it, and then you allow it. The one gentleman said that like the one component of when they broke down the marijuana, the one component increased depression, and that's another thing we find. I tell my young kids, I'm like, if you're using for anxiety, depression, you go at higher doses to help with your anxiety, depression, and it makes it worse. And it's like every other drug. When you back off of it, your anxiety gets worse. It's just like the alcoholic that's doing the alcohol. When he gets the morning jitters or she gets the morning jitters, it's not like they just have anxiety. They're low in their alcohol, and they got to take their eye opener. And so I find the same thing with marijuana. And a lot of these folks, I find that's when they get the cannabis hyperemesis, as they start realizing I'm smoking 3 times a day, And these people would qualify for probably your medical marijuana because they have anxiety, depression. I don't know if it's PTSD, what's in there, but somebody could clearly get them the medical marijuana. But they realize this is too much, and they start backing down, and they start vomiting, and they get dehydrated, and they get hyponatremia. What else? I don't know. Obviously, I'm kind of passionate about it. To me, the lowest members of society I see are folks that get addicted to medications or get addicted to drugs. I feel passionate about it. I write a lot of controlled substances, trying to get people that are already addicted to keep them alive with opiates and with buprenorphine, Suboxone, better known as. But I would never recommend anybody starting opiates because it changes your brain chemistry. From all I can see about the marijuana, it changes brain chemistry. You start off early in life. Not only do my addicts say that they think the marijuana increases their chance for addiction, but animal studies show that if rats take marijuana, they're more likely to get addicted to other psychoactive substances. So I know everybody's probably thinking themselves they're going to come up here and be real quick, and I've been rambling on.
Thank you. This is good information, and I appreciate your passion for your patients. Do we have any questions?
Anyone?
No, we're good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Yekel. And then I believe we have 2 folks still online with us. Dr. Ridpath and Michelle Simonetti. Michelle, you're up next. After Dr. Yekel.
Good afternoon, Chair Lady Davis, members of the committee, and all the staff. I'm Dr. Chris Yekel, and I speak today as a pediatric anesthesiologist who practiced here in Columbia from 1986 to 2021, primarily at Richland Hospital. I also speak today as a patient who has struggled with chronic pain since 2011 due to a complication from, of all things, the repair of a ruptured Achilles tendon. And I really only have 3 brief comments to share with you today. Number 1, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you and your legislative colleagues for your service to our state and its citizens. The majority of people in our country favor cannabis use, medicinal as they understand it or recreational, but much of its presumed benefits rely on the testimonies, not science, of patients and many others. Medical and recreational uses in the United States have now blended together and are becoming indistinguishable in the eyes of citizens. You are seeing and feeling pressure for cannabis gaining legitimacy as a mainstream, though precarious, medicinal substance. Within the United States, 37 states have legalized the use of cannabis for medicinal or recreational purposes, even though the federal government upholds its illegality. I can only imagine how you and your colleagues must balance the weight of political realities, input, and counsel from sometimes opposing directions and purported expertise, and then arriving at a decision that will go into law. You're asked to thread a needle that is delicately balanced between market, medicine, and the state. My second comment, primum non nocere. First, do no harm. The compounds within cannabis may have valid medicinal use. Indeed, the FDA has approved, as you've heard, Marinol for chemo-induced nausea, Sativex for spasticity and neuropathic pain, and Epidiolex for severe childhood epilepsy. But there's conflicting proof for other cannabinoid compounds and their uses at this point. There is, however, very good evidence that cannabis has significant detrimental effects, similar to alcohol, upon the developing central nervous system in individuals into their mid-20s. As an anesthesiologist in my career, I used powerful, mind-altering medications to create sleep and analgesia for thousands of patients using the guiding principle of first, do no harm. And interestingly, many of those medications I used every day and night were derived from plant sources. Medicinal plants and herbs have been used since ancient times for relieving pain caused by disease, injury, and surgery. Cocaine was the very first local anesthetic, and it originates from a specific plant alkaloid and was widely used intravenous anesthetic called propofol. That white magic milk that everybody seems to know about nowadays shares partial structure and pharmacological mechanisms with certain plant terpenoids such as thymol and eugenol that are contained in the spice thyme. The anesthetic adjunct morphine and the injectable muscle relaxant D-tubocurarine were also derived from the opium poppy and a South American climbing vine, respectively. The cannabis sativa plant has an incredibly multi-layered, rich, and versatile history of human uses for food and fiber, as well as recreational, religious, and spiritual purposes throughout the world, dating back thousands of years, including ancient Greece and Rome. I realize fully that this debate is not going away, but more research and clinical trials are needed for this plant and its compounds to be safely used without doing harm. Fortunately, governments worldwide are beginning to investigate cannabis along with previously untouchable drugs, such as ketamine, psilocybin or mushrooms, and LSD. The results to date are that clear evidence is not available in all spheres of what is labeled medicinal cannabis. And much of its presumed benefits, as I've already said and you've heard, rely on the testimonies of patients and others. And my third and final comment is not yet. This bill, all 24,000 words and 60-some pages, has been refined significantly by its authors and supporters, but is it ready to be law in our state? Will medical cannabis, as defined in this bill, offer the effective remedies that it hopes for? Does this bill alleviate symptoms and keep safe our children with autism and spasticity who would qualify in this bill's definition of medical marijuana? I say not yet. For myself and many physicians, this is not medicine, not yet. So thank you again for allowing me to offer comments. I'll answer any questions I can.
Do we have any questions? Mr. Pace?
Hey, thank you for your testimony. I just had a question. You mentioned the Schedule 1 to 3. We've talked about that with several other speakers as well. In your opinion, your professional opinion, if the FDA were to move that from Schedule 1 to either Schedule 3 or not scheduled, which was recommended originally before the 1972 law, would that speed up the research that you're saying needs to be done for this to actually be medicine?
I'm not an expert in that, but I think others have testified to that point. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I have a question too. So the last point you made was not yet. So if we assume and we agree that it's not yet, then in your opinion, what's the next best step? Is there a step to take now, or do we just sit back and conduct additional study?
I think more study, research, clinical trials are needed.
And what designates a clinical trial? Just so we understand exactly what you're talking about there.
I am not a researcher.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to throw a question your way.
I would defer to others, but I certainly know some of the terminology. And there's various levels of fidelity of clinical trials with new drugs that are being brought on. There's various phases, according to the FDA, and there's safety trials that you migrate through as a new drug trying to come to market. I know it's very expensive, it's very complex, and I just don't know exactly all those details. But I know that those experts are available to this committee, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this afternoon, and I appreciate your patience.
Thank you.
Michelle Simonetti is up next. I believe we have her online, correct?
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
I believe my camera is on. Hello.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So my name is Michelle. My background is in the medical field. I started out studying neuroscience as an undergrad and then working as a chemical analyst for medical specific products. I'm later providing neurofeedback and psychotherapy for patients wanting to avoid medication therapies for their mental health issues. For the past decade, I've worked as a software specialist with doctors who prescribe controlled substances, specifically in the mental health and addiction arena. This has given me a full understanding of the opioid epidemic that has become our norm. Bottom line, to communicate to you all is patients want and deserve a safe alternative that has proven to work in over 40 states. Not an easy decision, as was mentioned, but again, we're way behind the ball here, and patients are the ones that are struggling. One thing that I'd like to just communicate as far as what I've noticed in those states that have gone recreational, I know that's not something that is desired for South Carolina, and fully support that. It's become a commodity more than a treatment. So the most potent product that produces the most weight is what farmers are focusing on. This is not a medicinal product. Consider when we purchase a tomato from the supermarket, right? It's likely to have been grown by a farmer focused on the yield and shelf life. And it's unlikely the farmer's focused on the nutritional value of the product. So medicinal users are looking for a variety in strain, as an ailment or individual may respond differently based on the specific strain. So as you've experienced, we've all experienced, we go to the doctor and they have to try different drugs in order to see which one is responded to best. So same kind of chemical family, but having to try one versus the other. So we become guinea pigs to see which one we respond to best. So for the reasons that I've stated, I do hope that you vote for this bill. This isn't something new. Medical has been around for 30 years. There's plenty of clinical studies that have amazing results, even as local as here from USC with Dr. Nagakardi and his group. And for medical, this is the best solution, what we need for the legal shift. We're not needing that recreational step. We just need the medical aspect of it in order to have those different strains. So further, when writing the rules for the program, and I hope that it does make it to the point, I encourage you to allow for the cottage industry and cap the amount of large-scale grows that are permitted within the state. This would allow that variety of genetics that the patients will need. So thank you all for your time today. I know this is going to be a long meeting. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Simonetti. Do we have any questions? No, we do not. Thank you. I appreciate your patience with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. And next up, we have Amy Prock, Chief of Myrtle Beach Police. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon and making that drive. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Prock, and I am the Chief of Police of the Myrtle Beach Police Department. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the South Carolina Police Chiefs Association, the Myrtle Beach Police Department, the city that I serve, and the 15th Judicial Circuit. I want to strongly emphasize today that should this legislation pass, it will negatively impact our communities and our future. Impact. As a law enforcement officer, how will it impact? Currently, throughout the state, the law enforcement profession and our partners are facing several major issues and areas of concern that take up a lot of time and resources to ensure the safety and effectiveness for our community. These areas include, but are certainly not limited to, citizens suffering with mental health, opioid and heroin epidemic, homelessness, gun violence, and suicide. If we add the marijuana component to these already existing social issues that we are dealing with today, it will overwhelm these already understaffed and underfunded problems. We will be taking our focus off of the areas we have already identified and greatly need our attention. Impact. Numbers always speak loudly. We've heard a lot of them today. The Myrtle Beach area hosts 17.6 million visitors, which continues to increase year after year. In partnership with the Myrtle Beach Chamber of Commerce, we know that the state receives 1.6 billion lodging gross sales, 2.1 billion restaurant gross sales, 9.9 billion retail gross sales. Tourism accounts for 16.1 billion in annual sales in Horry County. Tourism annual economic impact at $11.9 billion, and Horry County generates about 30% of the state's total accommodations tax collection. What brings visitors to our area is our beaches and activities. Our visitors do not want to be exposed to this drug in public places. I say that because I hear that complaint. Through my experience in speaking with representatives from other states at my time during the National Academy, with the FBI, and my continued discussions with my colleagues from that time, marijuana has not had a positive impact to improve the quality of life in their communities. These are law enforcement officials from Arizona, Colorado, California, Nevada, Florida, Maryland, Virginia. Marijuana will negatively impact the activities and resources that make South Carolina communities desirable. South Carolina communities cannot afford that loss. And South Carolina cannot afford the negative impact of revenue. Impact. Numbers always speak loudly, but victims speak more to me. I will share just a few. In December 2019, in the 100 block of North Kings Highway, officers of Myrtle Beach Police Department responded to a shooting incident. Kayshawn Brammell was gunned down in the middle of Myrtle Beach over a quarter pound of marijuana. This was an illegal sale where the victim was shot over marijuana. In June of 2021, in the 4300 block of Willoughby Lane in Myrtle Beach, officers responded to a shooting incident where Canaan Cook Melvin and Jaleel Stevens was gunned down. Further investigation revealed this violent incident was over marijuana. From our city streets to our neighborhoods. Impact. Let's not forget what the Surgeon General has said about the impacts and what law enforcement across the state of Colorado has said and continues to say about impact. We don't want South Carolina to be another state that can speak firsthand about these impacts. We do not want South Carolina to be another state that can speak of increased DUIs and traffic deaths, increased teen suicides, increased teen use of other drugs, and increased birth defects, or increase in any demographics or any age groups. We want South Carolina to be the state that supports the research and takes the time to present the best plan and relies on our federal government to make the needed changes. Please understand that while we empathize with those who suffer from debilitating illnesses, we do not support this legislation. We believe any effort to legalize a drug that suppresses normal brain and nervous system activity without prior FDA approval is dangerous and will do more harm than good. Passing this legislation in the absence of both will endanger our children, our workforce, and quality of life in South Carolina. Thank you for having me here today.
Do we have any questions? Mr. Bass? Mr. Bass, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question, and I've been thinking about this for a while. Maybe you can answer this.
Certainly try.
So several folks have mentioned that the THC amount in marijuana has gone up pretty dramatically since the 90s and I assume since the 70s too. Can you explain like why that would be? Do you have any idea why
I
the
probably would leave
concentration's
that
gone
to
up?
our SLED representatives for our labs. Probably would be the best way to do that.
Okay, I'll ask them. Thank you.
Be the best way to answer that.
Mr. Sections, did you have a question? No. Okay.
But definitely because it's not regulated either. But
Thank you. And
drop it in.
thank you. I appreciate so much the drive from Myrtle Beach. I know that can be taxing. So we appreciate you being here. We appreciate you taking that drive and having patience with us this afternoon on this very important topic.
Wouldn't miss it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to continue with the chiefs. Next up, we have Marion Boyce, Chief of West Columbia. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Thank y'all for the opportunity to address this council on this important issue. I don't know that I bring anything individual to the table that y'all haven't heard already, but I will share just a few points from right across the river in West Columbia. We're averaging at the West Columbia, or City of West Columbia, the police department, around 34 to 37,000 calls for service annually. Half to a third of those, or third to half of those, directly or indirectly involve mental health and or substance use. That's a pretty big number for right across the river in Lexington County. I'm only 10 square miles of jurisdiction. We had a census population of probably 17,000 people, okay? So that's concerning. And we started looking at these numbers 8 years ago. That's concerning. They're only rising. We decided that we had to do some work on that because I hear people throw out this word of compassion and caring, and well, that's what we are. We're public servants, and I'm no different than you all sitting in front of me today. You're a public servant here as well to the citizens of South Carolina. And I hold that extremely important. That's one of my values, that I make sure that we serve those citizens to the best that we can. we created a partnership. We had to reach out to our flagship university here in our backyard, University of South Carolina's College of Social Work, and we partnered with them and built an outreach program. Because clogging up our booking jails or jails with booking detentions and our emergency departments with some of these folks isn't an answer. You can't arrest your way out of a problem like this. And we're seeing it in many different aspects of what we deal with on a daily basis. We were able to create this program. We've seen a reduction in law enforcement contacts, which is what our goal was to start with. And we've succeeded with that. Costs taxpayers $0. Great thing about being a partnership with a major university, right? So they actually study our program as well. We've since applied for another grant with DEOTUS. We were awarded one. I think we're one of 6 agencies in the state of South Carolina where we will have an arrest diversion program for low-level criminal offenses of substance use. So that's another important aspect that we're working towards and driving forward on. We see this with everybody, and we're seeing this in the cross sections of society that we deal with on a daily basis that are not law enforcement issues. Homelessness for one of those. Great example. It is not a crime to be homeless in the state of South Carolina. Now, there are byproducts that we see that tend to go towards criminal behavior. You might have loitering or littering or trespassing or some of those aspects to it. But the majority of the homeless population or unsheltered population in West Columbia that I talk to, that I'm in the woods with, we see mental health issues. We're seeing the overlap of substance use issues. I spoke with a gentleman 3 months ago, 2500 block of Augusta Road in the city of West Columbia in a wooded section out there. He lost his job because he hurt his back at work. Does not have insurance, can't afford insurance, can't afford health care. When the emergency department was prescribed pain reliever, got hooked on it, lost everything. Now he's in the woods. Now I'm being called by the property owner to do something with that person. What's the answer? Do we arrest him and take him to the county jail? Do we take him to the hospital? What are they going to prescribe him? That's my fear when we start talking about this as well. We're seeing this overlap. We already see this overlap in other aspects of what we deal with. I'm scared to see what this leads to. I think I stand with the rest of the police chiefs here today. My biggest fear is the legalization of recreational use of marijuana, and I know we're not here to talk about that. But I also see the path that we're on. And I have compassion for the people that live in my community, and it's my job to serve and protect them to the best of my ability and the men and women that work for me. This is not an FDA-approved drug. I'm sorry that people have pain and illness. I've torn my calf muscle today, and I've been in some pain, and I think I fell outside of that group Chief Keel talked about by about 5 years. So I'm 45 years old, so I think my warranty might have run out on it a little bit. But the point that I want to make is I'm here in front of you to oppose this piece of legislation, and it's not because I don't believe, and there may be a part of this plant that cures people with certain illnesses or debilitating illnesses. That's not it at all. But we're seeing firsthand right now in the streets, we're seeing firsthand in our communities what this drug is doing, what the addiction is happening, and the byproducts of these addictions. With that, I'll end it. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. And there again, thank you for being patient with us. Do we have any questions? No? Chief, if you'll stay at the mic for just a moment, I do have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
I watch Live PD like I think a lot of people do, and so I see what happens when someone's pulled over by the police and they're driving erratically. They've run a red light. They're not staying within their lines, and so they're pulled over to the side. And right now, if the officer smells marijuana, they can opt to search the vehicle, correct?
Yes, ma'am, probable cause search of that vehicle.
Right, and so part of that is looking for any more drugs that may be in the vehicle, but part of it also is making sure that the driver is not under the influence of something so that they can safely drive.
That's correct.
So my question, I think it's fairly clear with alcohol, right? When someone's under the influence, there's testing, and then once they get, I don't know, you may be able to do this out in the field, but there are tests that they can take, a breathalyzer test or whatnot. What sort of test do you have for marijuana? It's my understanding that marijuana will stay in the bloodstream for several days, and it can be tested after a few days. So could you talk a little bit about the process of understanding whether or not someone's incapacitated or under the influence of marijuana?
Well, Madam Chairwoman, I think that I can best maybe address your question by going through maybe some of these processes. If we use your scenario of a DUI or a suspected DUI driver, you're absolutely right. Alcohol is much more able to be tested and prevalent right there in the field than it would be marijuana. Now, if we're talking about smoked marijuana, like somebody lit a joint and smoked that joint, that's pretty telltale signs of that as well. Our data master machines don't pick up drugs. They're just there to measure alcohol. So I could fail every standardized field sobriety test on roadside, and I blow triple zeros on a data master machine. Well, I'm under the influence of something, but it's not alcohol. And that's where we stop. We need to then go to the hospital and go for a urinalysis test, which South Carolina's applied consent state, and they have a right to refuse that urinalysis test, and it's treated as a refusal on a DUI. Now, we do have a drug recognition program, but those officers that are part of our South Carolina or South Carolina certified drug recognition experts have to go to the academy and get additional training outside of what a regular law enforcement officer in this state goes to the academy to get. So that's an advanced training class. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I am not a certified drug recognition expert, and I can't speak to all the additional testing that they do, but there are additional tests that those officers do perform.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And next we have up Thomas Griffin, Chief of Chapin. Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. My name is Thomas Griffin. I am Chief of the Chapin Police Department, Chapin, South Carolina, right down the road, known as the capital of Lake Murray. Grew up in Chapin my whole life. Been in South Carolina my whole life. I have been in law enforcement for approximately 17 years. I did begin my career with West Columbia Police Department and have been the chief now for about 2.5 years. I'm thankful to be here on behalf of the South Carolina Police Chiefs Association. J.J. Jones, our president of that association, is an extremely phenomenal person when it comes to speaking on behalf of the police chiefs, but doing to serve the betterment of law enforcement across the state. So extremely thankful for his service to this state and just keeping us chiefs in line and keeping us up to date on what we need to know. I'm here to speak today in opposition of this medical marijuana bill going forward, and this for several reasons. And I know they've been highlighted and outlined by several chiefs prior to me coming up here, but it's still a Schedule I narcotic. It's not recognized as a medical substance by the FDA. It has, if you're to take time to reach out, which I trust that you have, I know as I'm in contact with my representatives in my area, they know my feelings on this stance, or they know my stance on this area of conversation. So I hope that you've had those conversations with your sheriffs, with your chiefs, because I would imagine a lot of them would take the same stance that we as Police Chiefs Association has taken, and this negative impact that illegal narcotics have on our towns, on our communities. I know a lot of the words that have been used is a gateway drug, so to say, for marijuana. And that's exactly what it is. You typically don't see someone that just jumps straight to methamphetamine or someone that jumps straight to cocaine. It's typically through the introduction of marijuana to their life. Marijuana being that gateway drug into the rest of those. It has negative repercussions throughout our community. I would also invite you, I know you speak to your representatives in law enforcement, but go out and speak to your police officers, your deputies. Ask for a ride along. We often offer out a ride along if someone would like to come on and see what we do day in and day out. But it just also goes to show you the real world negative effects that marijuana has in our society. I am concerned that I understand that this is for medical marijuana, but I do believe that this opens the door to the legalization of recreational marijuana. There's several things that we have that we're concerned of with that. Public safety concerns, the impact on our youth is going to be one of the bigger impacts of this bill. I believe legalizing medical marijuana, although it allows for it in the vape format, the gummy format, the edible format. To me, when I hear those formats, because I've seen this, it's directed directly towards our children and children in our high schools, children in our middle schools. Chapin High School is in our jurisdiction. It's comprised of about 1,500 students. It's almost on a regular daily basis, definitely weekly basis, where these kids are found with vapes in their possession. They're not just tobacco vapes, they're THC vapes, or it may be the Delta 9 vapes that are deemed legal through the Hemp Farming Act, but it is still a product of marijuana. And so our youth has been involved with these even from a young age at 15, 16. I know the gentleman spoke earlier about his son being addicted to marijuana. It is an addictive drug. It is. But the vape format it's something that's pretty popular amongst the younger generation because it's smokeless. No one likes the smell of smoke. I mean, and that's been long gone for some time, thankfully. But the vape, sometimes they have a pleasant smell to them. They smell like some fruit of some sort or candy or something to that matter. Therefore, there's not much of a deterrent to them because smells good, tastes good, makes them feel good. But the thing is those feelings that they're having, they do become addictive over time. Back in 2021, I'd just become chief of the Chapin Police Department, and we ended up having a drug deal gone bad over THC vapes in our Publix parking lot. It was two 15-year-olds and one 16-year-old. They went and met a drug dealer in the Publix in Chapin, where they exchanged money for THC vapes. There was some argument back and forth about the money that was paid for the vapes, and the kids being kids, not realizing that they're dealing with a real deal drug dealer. Think it's a joke, take off running, jump in the car, and start speeding down the road. Well, this individual pulls out a handgun, starts shooting at the vehicle multiple times. He hits the vehicle, I believe it was a total of 4 times. The rear frame of the vehicle, I mean, we're talking mere inches of a child being struck in the back of the vehicle they were in. And this is all over THC vapes. They naturally book it out of there. They throw the vapes that they just bought out the window because they're scared to be in trouble. They go home and they tell their parents that, a lie. They try to protect their own selves. That there was somebody else shooting at Publix and their truck got shot up. Thankfully, the diligent work of our officers got there and it was pretty quickly unfolded that's not what happened. And thankfully, they did end up telling the truth. And thankfully, that individual was arrested. He was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder for that. But it was all related to THC vapes that these teenagers were in possession of. And I'm just fearful that if this medical bill is allowed to go forward, with the THC vapes being put out into the market, whether it be for medicinal purposes, that's what it's supposed to be designed for. However, even prescription narcotics have been abused for some time. And I see if we start putting that out into the force or out into the community as medicinal purposes, I do foresee it being abused. I believe it's a gateway to recreational use. It's a public health risk. It's a potential, the societal cost, the lack of regulation, and there are alternative treatment methods to this currently. When it comes to Dr. Nagakati, when he was speaking about one quote that I found that was really, it meant a lot to me. It says, people who are healthy don't have the right to say they can't use it because they may abuse it. I understand that. I'm empathetic towards the people who are in pain and are needing this medicine. And or not medicine, but this drug that they think that will be able to treat these symptoms. However, there are current drugs out there that do treat those symptoms, thankfully. However, but when he says people who are healthy don't have the right to say they can't use it because they may abuse it, well, I'm here to tell you, being firsthand, face-to-face with individuals who have family members, who have daughters, sons, mothers, fathers, who have abused drugs, who have abused opioids to the extent that their loved one's no longer living. Just to have that heart-to-heart with that family, knowing that the addictive behaviors, the addictive properties of that drug that they're using led to the loss of that loved one. I'm telling you, that abuse takes a little bit further than just abuse. It's costing lives. And I'm fearful that should the medical marijuana bill be passed, I think it will graduate into recreational use, and which in turn create a drug problem that we haven't seen ever before here in South Carolina. Legalization of marijuana, it creates a slippery slope that could eventually strip away everything this state stands for when allowing people a safe, secure place to live, work, and raise a family. So with that, I oppose the medical marijuana going forward.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any questions here? No. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. So next up, we have Michael Harvey.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker
Thank
and
you.
panel. My name is Mike Harvey. I'm a registered nurse with 30 years of bedside experience. I'm a retired Army Nurse Corps officer, and I recently graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, with a Master's of Science, Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics. This is taught by the Pharmacology Department. It's not something that's just fly by night. We've had so many people have already talked on the points that I wanted to talk about. There was a question about the synthetic drugs that were brought out in 1985, those for cachexia and for nausea and vomiting, muscle wasting. The question about illicit. So we do know that if you look at Schedule I drugs cannot be researched easily. It costs more money and it takes more time. So even if it may be 5 times as much to actually do a cannabis study on cannabis. There is research being done completely around this entire world. Every developed country has cannabis research. Today, if you go look at PubMed.com, there's 33,700 odd number reports on cannabis. I'm a diabetic. I looked up at metformin. There was only 30,000. There's more interest on cannabis than there is on metformin. The questions have been asked about prohibition. Do you know where the beginning of prohibition came? In the 30s, following the rescindation of alcohol. So we had the Federal Bureau of Narcotics that was established. I would like to read to you the wonderful words of Harry Anslinger, who was the first director of the Federal Bureau. Sorry, a little bit nervous here. One of our highest law enforcement officers is reported to have said, there are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the United States, and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing results from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and others. Cannabis was originally stopped because of racism. Do you know where the word marijuana comes from? Before that, it was considered cannabis. From 1850 to 1942, United States Pharmacopoeia, which was the drugs that were allowed to be given by physicians, cannabis was a major drug. Lilly, Park Davis, all these companies had cannabis on the market. It wasn't until the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, when Harry Anslinger's words brought up marijuana, that this new drug was out there. The American Medical Association actually rejected the removal of cannabis. However, nobody was really aware of what was going on because they were using the word marijuana. Now, I've listened the whole night. We've talked about marijuana. Marijuana is that term we used to give it a bad inclination. I would prefer we call it cannabis, which is actually more medically related. Schedule I drugs cannot be easily researched. And if you look at what Schedule I states, substances are described as having unacceptable lack of safety, a high potential of abuse and addiction, and currently have no accepted medical use in the treatment in the United States. Regarding safety, we have no reports of overdose deaths related to cannabis, just cannabis, plant medicine, not tainted. Please look at the National Institute of Drug Abuse. They have the marijuana facts sheet. It talks about addiction potential and gateway theory. Regarding addiction, research has clearly shown that cannabis addiction is around 9% for those starting at the age of 18 or older. I do not support children using cannabis. A lower addiction rate than for cigarettes and alcohol, which we know the state generates a lot of revenue off of. That source is also the National Institute of Drug Abuse. Regarding no acceptable medical use, we do know that there are technically 4 FDA-approved drugs on the market. The first one was in 1978, when Robert Randall successfully sued the United States government and the U.S. Supreme Court. He won. The government now had to provide him with cannabis, a daily cannabis amount. This cannabis was grown at the University of Mississippi through the National Institute of Drug Abuse. It was then sent up to North Carolina, Research Triangle Park, where it was rolled into nice little cigarettes. It was then sent in a metal tin, which I meant to bring today. 300 cannabis cigarettes every month were mailed to that patient. What did he die of? It wasn't related to cannabis. There were 14 total patients that received this cannabis through the federal government until 1985, when the synthetic cannabis came out on the market. Now you can't get plant medicine. You asked the question about why is the rates of cannabis THC content. Well, when you look at Prohibition time with alcohol, there was a lot of stills in the background making moonshine. If I'm going to be carrying around cannabis and it's illicit, why carry around something with a 7% THC? Prohibition allowed the illicit market to make cannabis at a much higher rate. I think we are seeing it 17 to 25%. Now, when you concentrate that, you can get it higher. Most medical patients are not using high-dose cannabis. It just doesn't benefit us. Most of us want to use cannabis to be functional. We want to be able to go to work. We want to be able to do schoolwork. We want to be able to enjoy our lives. Just because you use low-dose cannabis, it does not mean that you're going to spend the day high. Most of your adult use, which is what our law enforcement are speaking on, is where the harm comes from. They've talked greatly about the endocannabinoid system, which was discovered in the 90s. It is important to understand that single molecular pharmaceuticals have been the major problem. We didn't see a lot of these conditions coming around until we went to single dose molecules. Cannabis does have 400 or 500 chemicals in it. It can be beneficial because when you look at it, cannabis has been shown to support patients needing medicines for insomnia. Well, we also know it's an anti-inflammatory, an anxiolytic, multiple conditions. So one medication may actually benefit multiple medical conditions. You've had a long day. I don't think you want to have me bore you anymore. If you have any questions, I would love to address anything that you have.
Are there any questions?
Come on. I didn't spend 4 years in
Mr.
nursing and
Sessions?
tears.
No?
Awesome.
Go ahead.
So I think I heard you say that this medication may have many uses and benefit many people. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why do you think the FDA has not approved it yet?
Because it's a Schedule I drug. It's very difficult to do research. They approved the synthetic THC, which is interesting. How can a synthetic THC be a Schedule III when the plant itself is a Schedule I? And then you look at the other half of the plant, it's not even scheduled anymore. So I can take the plant medicine, break it down, and it's now considered a drug.
Then why would you think the schedule has not changed then?
I'd have to go back to Harry Anslinger, law enforcement and political feelings. We're scared of it. We don't have the ability to talk. When I go to see my VA providers, they do not want to talk about cannabis, even if it's to tell me, I think it's bad. There's so much fear. This is interesting that we're actually getting to talk in front of you, but it takes a lot to get in front of you. Physicians are fearful of coming out and talking because they know that for the most part, the medical community does not support cannabis. But we do have groups such as the American Cannabis Nurses Association, which is 1,500 cannabis nurses. We have the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, which has a couple of thousand various types of physicians that support medical cannabis. They are doing research, but it's hard to do research on a Schedule I, and it's also hard to get our foot in the door and communicate. Most of my representatives and senators will not discuss cannabis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you asking the question.
Anything else? Thank you. Appreciate your patience. Next up, we have Mr. Daniel Bundrick. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you again. I'm Daniel Bundrick. I'm a pharmacist for about 40 years now. I graduated in 1984 at the University of South Carolina. And I was going to give some different talk, but now that y'all have heard everything, I've kind of, it's going to be a little bit different. But I will say that I'm an optimist. So I feel like we're a lot closer than we think. I think we're arguing on points that, recreational versus medical. I don't think that's going to go away. The medical, with the officer from Myrtle Beach, which I'm from Surfside Beach. I grew up in Lexington. But when people do this, it's going to be, which I love this bill because it is involving a pharmacist and a doctor. A lot of states don't have that. I think our bill is mirrored more toward Missouri if you look at their bill. So I feel like, I'm losing my point here, that we're just a lot closer, and that pharmacists that pharmacist that was on the video there, he made some just really great points. That what we do for a living is, we dispense medication. So we provide the product, but that's just one small part. You don't go to pharmacy school 6 years, just to put the pills in the bottle. But it's giving that information to that patient. Like if they get a new drug like Lipitor, which is a torvastatin, you're going to tell them all about it. It can cause rhabdomyolysis, muscle weakness. Take it at night. That's when your liver produces more cholesterol. Generally, it can cause, especially in South Carolina, it makes your skin more sensitive to sunlight. So again, with our bill, you're going to have a pharmacist telling these patients all these things that they need to look out for: dry mouth, drowsiness, all these things, and they'll know what other medicines they're taking. So I think, we're just confusing the recreational part, and that's not going to go away. If you look at what's happening now, there's a compound THCA. Okay, so THCA, when it's just, even as a flower, it's legal. Okay, but when you put heat to it, it's what they call decarboxylation. When you decarboxylize it, it produces THC. So like I was in Tennessee about a month ago, and I went in the dispensary. I saw, wow, they got a dispensary here. So I was shocked, but it was just legal Delta-9 THCA. So all the things that law enforcement's been talking about, it's not going to go away. The thing in Chapin, all that, it's not legal now, and they're already doing it. So that part's not going away, and it's not even like the tourism. People aren't going to be smoking. There's not going to be flowers, so they're not going to hurt the tourism. Like I'm at Surfside Beach, it's already there. Sometimes you do go and you smell it and all that, but with this, people are going to do it at home. Like when you take prescriptions, you take them at your house. So again, it's a doctor-patient relationship. They got a pharmacist counseling them. They're going to be taking their medicines at home, not out in public, because most people aren't going to want to admit, oh, I'm taking cannabis. And again, I think we're a lot closer. And we do have some treasures in the state. I want to say I'm proud. I've been here my whole life. Like my mother, if it passes, she'll never use it. She doesn't even like me to talk about CBD, much less cannabis. My wife actually ran the board of pharmacy, so again, she doesn't like to talk about this. So I understand it's very controversial. But I think in the environment we're doing it, and the more that I've studied it, I have seen all those anecdotal things. One point I do want to make is, far as we kept talking about hold on. With the reclassification from Schedule 1 to 3. So let me just read it because I know a lot of people ask questions. On August 29, 2023, the Department of Health and Human Services submitted an analysis to DEA recommending that cannabis be rescheduled as a Schedule 3 controlled substance. They made this form public in an unredacted form last Friday when this was written. And then I'd like to read what this kind of means. So rescheduling cannabis under the CSA 21 812B, requires 3 findings. It has a lower potential abuse than Schedule 1 and 2 drugs. It has currently accepted medical uses, so that tells you that it is effective. And it may lead to moderate or low dependence, which we know is happening. And again, these high concentrations, that's not what they want to get healthy, not high. So I feel like there'll be combinations with CBD and THC. And that's important. Like, the more I've gotten into this, I've, studied it. And some of the compounds, what they call isolates, just don't work well. Like I've sold CBD at my pharmacies. And the full spectrum CBD that has a little bit of the 0.3% or less THC, it's got the flavonoids, it's got lipids and fats, it's got all the things that you need. It leads to what they call an entourage effect. So that little bit of THC makes a huge difference. The only time I sell an isolate, because it just doesn't work well, just like those synthetic drugs, they just don't work well. So you need that plant, and that's why I agree not yet, and we'll get into the FDA too, but I think this bill is ready. I think it's restrictive enough. I think, with having the doctor and pharmacist, and we're just getting confused with recreation. I don't support recreational either. As far as the FDA, and there's a lot of good things happening, and a lot of people are studying it in different countries. The people I'm working with, they're doing a lot in Canada, Dominican Republic, Brazil. So it's Israel. Israel's a leader. So it's out there, it's happening. It again goes back to politics, way back with the Nixon, because once it's a Schedule 1, it's just, you can't really do studies. I'm working with a group now with the future that they are going to start investigating or start investing in these drugs, but you're talking major, major dollars to get this done. So I think that's been the biggest thing why there hasn't been really studies, because this is just very expensive. The other thing I'd like to bring up is talking about vaping. We've been talking about vaping. And as a pharmacist, I really don't like vaping because bubble lungs and the different things it can cause. So there's one legislation in Alabama that uses nebulizers, and I think that's something we should consider. Nebulizers, just like what you would think, they use vibrating mesh instead of heat or flame to get it into the alveoli of your lungs. So to me, that's a great delivery system. The processes now that these companies have, they use nanotechnology, so you use less API, active pharmaceutical ingredient. So I think with using some of the things of the future, and by the time this bill gets here, I think a lot of things will be in place that is going to be safer. And to me, it's a safer way to do it. You're not going to stop, they're getting it now. You're not going to stop that. And I feel for law enforcement, because I know it's a struggle for them. If they stop somebody now, they can say, oh, I'm just smoking CBD or Delta 8, and they may not be, but you got to prove it. So I feel for them, but I think for this bill, with the way it's written, it's restrictive, and it does include the pharmacists that can do what they went to school for the 6 years of program, and the doctors. I've talked to a lot of cannabis doctors. I'm dealing with a Dr. Donner in Pennsylvania, and he has an operation in Costa Rica also. So again, he knows that cannabis isn't used for everything, but he says it's really helped him manage his patients, and he loves using it over, traditional medicines. And my last story that I'll tell you is when I first started pharmacy school, I had Dr. Sadek. I wasn't lucky enough to have Dr. Cutler, but I had Dr. Sadek, and he asked a question, and we were pre-pharmacy, first year, and he said, does anybody know what a xenobiotic was? And of course, none of us, we didn't know. And he went on to explain that xenobiotics are foreign substances to your body. He said, one day, if you get out of pharmacy school, y'all are going to be selling and dispensing these xenobiotics. And he said, your body tries to reject xenobiotics. It's not a natural substance. And that's where I think we're drawing the line. I think the plant, if it's a plant, your body doesn't try to reject it. So that's why I think that cannabis in general is a lot safer than synthetic drugs, and why, like that pharmacist said, he can't even order Marinol anymore. No, it's because it doesn't work. Just like the isolates and CBD, they just don't. You have to take such huge dosage, nobody can afford to do it. So I think with the technology coming, the restrictive as it is, I think it's a good bill to get it into people that need it, and they're not going to be doing it in the street. They're going to be doing it at their home. So anyway, thanks for your time today.
Thank you for your time. Did we have any questions? I think you're good. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it. Next, and we're getting close to the end, guys. Stick with us a little bit longer. Dr. Stephanie Burgess. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Dr. Stephanie Burgess, and I'm a family nurse practitioner here in the South Carolina area. I'm also a provider in an inpatient hospice facility. I'm here today representing the Coalition for Access, which is over 8,000 nurse practitioners and nurse midwives. And we are in support of the bill. We do not support recreational use. I don't want to make that really clear. It's just for medical use only, for restrictive cases only. Research does show that medical marijuana can alleviate symptoms, and in my hospice facility, we have patients with nausea, intractable nausea, vomiting, pain, pain related to cancer, pain related to neurological disorders, and I'm talking about serious disorders, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, Huntington's chorea. If you've never seen that, you will never forget it. Lou Gehrig's disease, all of those are terminal. I'm not talking about fibromyalgia, okay? I'm talking about serious musculoskeletal issues. We also have patients with end-stage HIV, and we also have patients with end-stage renal disease, and they have decreased appetite. So we know that some of the medical marijuana research shows that it can stimulate that appetite. And my area of research, I am a distinguished professor at USC as well, and my area of research was in HIV and quality of life. We did not study medical marijuana, though, but we did study quality of life issues. And for them, it was a lot of no appetite and a lot of nausea. So frankly speaking, as the provider in this inpatient hospice facility, it's really gut-wrenching to have these patients come in who are admitted to our facility, and they are screaming and begging me for relief from their symptoms. And many of them are transitioning, which means they're going to die and pass away probably within the month, maybe 2 months max, but they are really at a point where they are in need of relief. Medical marijuana probably could be used as an adjunct therapy to the pain medications that I prescribe, but we don't know that because it's not been available. And I personally challenge each of you and any member of the House or Senate to come with me to this facility and witness this firsthand. It is awful. And all of us have stories, the police department, the sheriffs, the medical providers, but I'm going to share one with you. I had a lady come in this past year. She was a very young mother. She had pancreatic cancer with liver mets. If you don't know anything about pancreatic cancer, it is an unforgiving cancer. There's no cure. Anyway, she had terrible pain, but her nausea was even worse, and I had a hard time. All of us had a hard time really trying to get her symptoms under control so that she could at least be awake to spend some quality time with her children before she passed. That never happened. It was terrible. So we are asking you all to really consider the Compassionate Care Act. We know it has some restrictive use in there, and I'm going to even offer another one. This is not on behalf of my colleagues, but perhaps maybe a way to start Compassionate Care Act in medical marijuana would be to have that prescribed for patients who are in hospice or in palliative care service. I'm not talking in an inpatient facility per se. I'm talking about in a service. When you're in a hospice or a palliative care service, you have a lot of eyes that are monitoring the patient and the family. They make home visits. Most of these patients are served in the home. And that means we have medical providers going out once a month. You have a community nurse going out once a week. You have a CNA going out 3 to 5 times a week. You have a chaplain who goes out twice a month, and you have a social worker. So you have a lot of people making sure they are watching these people and making sure things are done correctly. And as the police said, they're not out selling their medication, and they're not sitting around smoking big fat blunts and getting stoned. Just saying. Well, that's probably what some people would do. Anyways, we do hear what law enforcement has to say. We respect them and we appreciate their service, but we are asking you all to consider maybe for these types of patients, this might be a way to start medical marijuana. And then that way, data can be collected from the law enforcement side and the medical provider side and look at outcomes. I'm just offering that. Anyways, any questions for me?
Mr. Pace, do you have a question? Oh.
So you're talking about the palliative care and the hospice care. Is that, are those folks trained already with like opioids and how to monitor that sort of intake?
Oh, yes. We have people like myself. Now, I work in the inpatient side, but we have nurse practitioners or physicians who make monthly visits to the homes. Usually it's the nurse practitioner. We have social workers go out once a month. We even have, I don't know what you call them, they're like mini med carts that are controlled and they're for diversion so that patients can't like pull out 10 blunts or whatever it is and smoke pot and get high. It's all about control for diversion so that even family members can't get to it. So it's very controlled. We have a chaplain that goes out. And that's a requirement under CMS that you have all these people involved. That's a requirement for reimbursement. So yeah, it's very controlled.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate your time.
Yes, ma'am. Y'all have a long day. I'm going home.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
The last one on our list, I believe, is Brian Clark.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and members of the committee that have made it this far with me, so thank you. My name is Brian Clark. I'm a licensed pharmacist of 26 years. As the CEO of the South Carolina Pharmacy Association, I come before you today to offer our organization support for S423 as written. Also want to give our perspective on the crucial matter of legalization of medical marijuana. At the heart of our position ties a fundamental belief. Where medication is present, pharmacists should play an integral role within the multidisciplinary team. We've heard from nurses, we've heard from prescribers, we've heard from other pharmacists today. This is where the Pharmacy Association stands, and so I wanted to be on the record. Approximately 5 years ago, we knew this was coming, so our association meticulously crafted a set of policy and position statements, and I'd like to share just a couple of those with you today. We do advocate for the resolution of federal and state conflicts surrounding the legal status of cannabis and its components, including CBD. We encourage healthcare provider education on the efficacy, safety, and management of patients using cannabis. We advocate for pharmacists to collect and document patient information regarding cannabis use and provide appropriate counseling. We support pharmacists' participation in furnishing cannabis when supported by scientific data and permitted by laws and regulations. We oppose the furnishing of cannabis for medical purposes unless performed by licensed healthcare professionals who comply with these regulations. We support clinical judgment of pharmacists in deciding whether to furnish cannabis for medical use where allowed by law. And we oppose pharmacist involvement in furnishing cannabis for recreational use. We've heard a lot about that today. In summary, our association emphasizes the importance of pharmacists in the safe and effective use of cannabis for medical purposes. We advocate for regulatory clarity, standardized practices, and pharmacist involvement in patient care. We believe that by adhering to these principles, we can ensure the responsible integration of medical marijuana into our healthcare system, benefiting patients while safeguarding public health. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective as well as that of our organization. We remain committed to collaborating with policymakers, healthcare providers, and other stakeholders to navigate this complex issue in the best interest of our patients, communities, and citizens of South Carolina. I welcome any questions you may have.
Any questions? Thank you. You've wrapped it up for us.
Thank you.
We appreciate everyone's participation and all of your thoughts. All of this information, of course, we will duly note and seriously consider. We are now adjourned unless anybody has any other questions. They're ready to get out of here. Anything else for the group? Okay. Thank you.